So there I was, standing in my manager's office, getting called dead weight without him even looking up from his ledger. Trash pay for a trash appraiser. That's what 6 years bought me. I didn't know it yet, but before the day was out, something older and considerably more terrifying than my manager was going to need me alive far more than he'd ever needed me employed. Guildmaster Valerius delivered the whole thing in less time than it took to sign the form. Combat null, he called me. No stats worth the payroll. Cutting weight. He slid my severance across the mahogany desk like it might be contagious. 6 years hauling crates of rusted gear across the guild docks. Inventory nobody else wanted to touch. Tallied by hand, because I actually enjoyed getting the numbers right. 6 years of quotas hit, and never once thanked for it. I didn't argue. Arguing costs energy, and I was fresh out. I walked out of that office already doing the math on how long I could stretch what was in my pocket, and that's when the floor lit up gold under my boots. No warning, no ceremony. Just a circle of burning script blooming under my feet like the building had been waiting all day for exactly this moment, and then the guild hall wasn't there anymore. I had time to be furious about it. Falling from 400 meters gives a man a genuinely absurd amount of time to be furious. Long enough to do the math twice. Terminal velocity, distance, a number of seconds that was not zero but felt insultingly close to it. I informed the rushing air that I'd been fired and pancaked in the same afternoon, that they'd love that kind of efficiency in the report, cause of death, severance. The wind ate most of it. I kept talking anyway. Screaming felt like giving the fall too much credit, and I'd rather go out as a bad joke than a good scream. Somewhere below me, something the size of a city block was rushing up to meet me at a speed with no polite name. I tried bargaining next, on the theory that a man with nothing left to lose might as well negotiate with gravity itself. I offered the dark any demotion it wanted, up to and including cleaning latrines with my own face, which, incidentally, was about to happen anyway. Gravity did not counter. Gravity has never once countered. Whatever was rushing up to meet me had shape now, jagged black spires, a floor that looked less like a floor and more like a mouth that had given up trying to look friendly. I revised the eulogy in real time. Not a puddle, a stain with opinions. A cautionary anecdote some future clerk would hear at orientation, right before getting handed his own depth 99 license. I was already drafting the actual version, short, unimpressive, mold warehouse footnote, when the air caught me. Not soft, not gentle. Just solid, all at once, a wall where there should have been nothing. I stopped 4 feet above the puddle I'd been narrating. Safety shield, absorbed. Fall damage, 0. I lay there in the dirt not dying, which was new information I needed a second to process. Something told me, in a voice like a mountain clearing its throat, that I would have made an unpleasant sound hitting that at speed, and that it would rather not clean it up. Appreciated, I told it. Also tremendously overdue. 9 feet of cracked obsidian scale unfolded out of the dark in front of me. Curved black ram horns, dim gold runes pulsing under his hide like a furnace running out of fuel. The floor 100 boss. The thing every guild report swore never left its throne room, and it was crouched over a fired warehouse clerk like this was a completely normal Tuesday. He told me I was bonded now. Shopkeeper's contract. The shield that had just saved my ungrateful life wasn't a gift. It ran on evolution shards, and it drained whether I was using it or not. Shopkeeper's contract, bound. Evolution shard reserve, 0. Safety shield, offline, insufficient reserve. Up close, the gold veins running through his chest weren't glowing so much as guttering. The light of something burning its last reserves and pretending otherwise. Whatever he was, he didn't look like a monster shopping for a victim. He looked like a man closing out a very old, very tired ledger. I asked him why me. Not even a question by that point. More of a formality. He said I'd been standing closest to a door he needed opened, which wasn't an answer, and the way his eyes slid off mine when he said it told me he knew exactly how much of a non-answer that was. Ask again once I'd earned one. I didn't fight, he told me. Not ever. The contract forbade it. I crafted, I sold, I survived. Simple. I pointed out that the shield he'd just used on me was already reading offline. He said it ran on whatever charge had come bundled with the teleport, and now it ran on shards, and I didn't have any. He said it like weather. I want to fix that, he added, before something on this floor noticed I wasn't protected anymore. He didn't wait for me to argue. The gold circle bloomed once more under his own feet, and he was gone the way he'd come. No goodbye, no further instructions, just the sudden, total absence of the only thing standing between me and floor 99. Empty stone room. One crate. An iron-bound door I had no reason to trust. A torch that annoyed the dark more than it lit it. No weapon, no plan, 6 years of warehouse logistics, and a shop I hadn't even seen the inside of. Floor 99 breathed on the other side of that door. Nobody had come back from it in 4 years, and the one thing keeping it off me had already burned through its last charge, catching a man it didn't even like. Somewhere out there was whatever had earned this floor its reputation, and it didn't know yet that the newest thing living here couldn't so much as make a fist in its own defense. F-rank shopkeeper. 0 shards. 0 weapons. A contract that wouldn't let me throw a punch even if I found one worth throwing, and a boss who'd vanished before I could ask a single follow-up question. Whatever was out there was about to find out exactly how undefended I was, and I didn't get a vote in win. The scratching started about 4 minutes after the boss left. I know it was 4 minutes because counting was the only job I had left. No shield charge, no weapon, no plan. Just a door I didn't trust, a torch that barely paid its own rent and light, and something on the far side of the iron testing the hinges. It didn't sound big. It sounded small and numerous, which on this floor was probably worse. I did what any professional does with his last minutes alive. I took inventory. The crate lid came up easier than rusted iron corners had any right to allow. Inside, stacked with insulting neatness, was a starter kit. 4 sacks of dark grain, 40 pounds each by the shoulder test. A sealed clay jar labeled culture, live, do not drink, the first honest label I'd read in 6 years. 2 coils of copper tap line. 12 glass tankards packed in straw. A water barrel, full and cold. And stamped into the bottom board, 1 line of system script. The 1 crate, category locked, brewing supplies. 1 category at a time. Fill it with brews, it holds brews forever. Fill it with anything else, the brews go. Somebody had designed this thing specifically to punish a man for diversifying. The scratching moved to the gap under the door. Whatever was out there had found the smell of the grain. I stood very still in the middle of my 1 stone room, shieldless, and understood that the smell was either going to get me eaten or get me paid, and the difference came down to speed. The system agreed. Mythic Brewing, unlocked. Recipe available, Evolution Suds. Brew time, 8 hours. Yield, for tankards. Evolution Suds, named by someone who had never worked a market stall in their life, but I wasn't in a position to argue with free intellectual property. The recipe wanted grain, water, live culture, heat, and patience. I had all 5, if spite counts as patience. What the recipe did not mention anywhere was fighting. The loop it described was cleaner than that. I craft, a monster drinks, the monster evolves, the monster pays me in evolution shards. The shards feed the shield that keeps me from becoming a menu item. Nobody in the chain swings anything at anybody, which was convenient, because my strength stat was a 1 and the system had printed it without comment, which I chose to take personally. So I rolled my sleeves and started a beverage program, for 100 meters below my last paycheck. Mash in the barrel, culture in the mash. Tap line coiled over the torch bracket for heat, because the room came with exactly one fire, and I wasn't sentimental about ambience. The work steadied my hands the way work always had. Measure, pour, seal, weight. 6 years of counting other people's crates, and the first inventory I'd ever run for myself was happening in a grave with a door. The door, for the record, held all night. The scratching gave up somewhere in the dark hours, and I slept sitting against the crate with a tankard in my fist. Not to drink from. It was the heaviest thing I owned. Next morning, the barrel had gone quiet. I cracked the seal and the smell rolled out, sweet and sharp, and the liquid inside had turned a blue that did not occur in nature. Iridescent, neon, lit from inside, with a head of white foam that built itself without being asked. I poured one tankard and held it up to the torch, and my first thought was that I could have retired on this recipe topside. My second thought was that topside had fired me, so they could keep the tap water. Evolution Suds, for servings ready. The scratching came back around what my stomach said was midday. One set of claws this time, small and businesslike, working at the door gap. I got down on the floor and looked. Looking back at me was a rat, not a surface rat. This one was the size of a loaf, plated in gray gravel-colored scales, with bare patches where the plating had cracked and not grown back. Ribs showing under the stone. It wasn't hunting me. It was starving, and the grain smell had dragged it here on rails. A customer with no money. I'd met plenty. I poured 2 fingers of suds into a tankard, set it on the floor, and opened the door 4 inches, which I want on the record as the bravest inventory decision of my career. The rat flinched, froze, then followed its nose in. It hit the tankard face first. The blue went down in one long pull. What happened next, I had read about an hour earlier and still wasn't ready for. The rat seized up. The cracked plating along its back lit from underneath, the same neon blue as the brew, and then the whole animal molted in fast forward. New plate, thicker, slate dark, interlocked. It came out the far side of the process half again bigger, breathing easy, calm in a way starving things never are. Evolution successful. Payment received, 1 evolution shard. Evolution shard reserve, 0 to 1. Safety shield, online. The hum I hadn't known I was missing came back on somewhere under my skin, and my shoulders came down off my ears for the first time since the fall. 1 shard. 1/10 of it gone by tomorrow to upkeep, if the boss's math held. Terrible margin. Any margin at all was a promotion. The rat looked at me. I looked at the rat. Then it put its snout back in the tankard, found it empty, and gave me a stare I recognized from every customer I'd ever met at closing time. It didn't get a refill. It hadn't paid for a refill. It rattled off into the dark with its new armor clicking, and I wrote the whole transaction into the dust on the crate lid with my finger. Sold, 1 serving. Received, 1 shard. Outstanding, everything else in my life. I spent the afternoon on operations. Water hauled, second mash set, tankards racked where the torchlight would catch them from the door. If the smell was going to advertise whether I liked it or not, the least I could do was control what it advertised. 3 servings left from batch 1. 8 hours to batch 2. A shield running on 1 shard and a drain I couldn't see. I did that arithmetic maybe 40 times, and it came out survivable in 38 of them. The 2 failures assumed a customer bigger than a rat. The door came off its top hinge a little after dark. The thing that shouldered through was 7 feet of starving. Gray skin shrink-wrapped over ribs. Horns filed to stumps. Fingers twice the length fingers should be, ending in claws that had been chewed. A lesser demon, the kind the guild manuals rated as a squad problem, and it crossed my shop floor in 2 strides with its mouth already open, and there was nothing between us but stale air, because it had not come for the menu. It had come for the chef. I said, "We're closed." It lunged. The room went white. Safety shield, impact absorbed. Reserve draining. The demon bounced. Not a metaphor. It hit the air a hand's width from my face and folded backward onto my floor, and the shield hum climbed to a pitch I could feel in my teeth, and somewhere behind my sternum a number I could not afford started going down. The demon got up slow. It looked at me, at the shimmer in the air, back at me. It was doing hungry thing math, and I watched it run all of it, claws flexing, weighing a second lunge against whatever the first one had cost. Then its nostrils flared. Its head turned, 1 degree at a time, away from me, toward the rack by the torch, where 3 tankards of evolution suds sat glowing blue against the dark. Its throat moved, and it stopped being interested in me at all, which should have been a relief, and instead was the single most dangerous development of my day. The shield had a meter. The demon had all night. And I had 3 servings between me and finding out what a starving squad problem does when the free samples run out. 10 feet of stone floor between me and the demon, and neither of us had moved in a full minute. It stood in the wreck of my door with its chewed claws hanging loose, eyes going from me to the rack of blue tankards and back, and the arithmetic in that skull was not complicated. Eating me had already cost it 1 full-body bounce off the air. The drinks were not defended, and the look it kept giving my rack was the look of a shopper who has found the discount aisle. I moved first, because standing still was doing nothing for my margins. I took 1 tankard off the rack, walked it forward, set it on the floor at the halfway line, and stepped back behind my counter, which was a crate. Halfway was as far as its nerve had carried it, so that was where the product went. The demon crossed the room in a crouch, snatched the tankard, and drank it the way drowning men breathe. Then it went rigid. I'd watched a rat do this the day before, so I thought I knew the shape of it. I did not know the shape of it. The rat had molted. The demon detonated, slow, from the inside. Blue light climbed out of the cracks in its gray skin. The filed horn stumps split and shed and came back full length and swept back, black as the walls. It gained a foot of height, then another. The chewed claws sloughed off whole, and what grew under them was precise, curved, and built for work I didn't want itemized. The rib cage stopped being visible. The shaking stopped with it. Evolution jump, lesser demon to greater demon. Payment received, 3 evolution shards. Notice, subject at capacity. Further jumps locked until the new tier settles. 3 shards for 1 serving. The rat had paid 1 for a molt. The system priced by distance jumped, and I had just learned my top shelf from my bottom shelf in a single transaction. The reserve read 3 and change, minus whatever the shield sipped while I stood there being educated. The demon flexed its new hands. It looked at them for a long time. Then it looked at me, and I watched something get decided. It knelt. Head down, palms flat on my floor, 9 feet of predator folded into the posture of a man asking his landlord for 1 more week. The word it produced had gravel in it, and came out sideways past teeth, not built for talking. More. I told it the truth. More existed, more was brewed fresh daily, and more had a price, and the price was not blood, because blood was worthless to me, and I was the only vendor on this floor. Labor, though. Labor I could use. The door it had broken needed hanging. Water needed hauling. Stock needed guarding from everything smaller and stupider than it. In exchange, a ration. Small pours, watered, steady. The good stuff, the full-strength jump, that was top shelf, and top shelf had to be earned. It listened with its head tilted, and when I stopped talking it picked up my iron-bound door with 2 fingers and hung it back on the bent hinge, then bent the hinge straight around it with a thumb. Staff registered, 1. Crafting time reduced, brew time 8 hours to 4 hours. The system had opinions about employment law, apparently, and all of them were in my favor. Half the brew time for 1 pair of hands. I stood there reading the panel and revising every production estimate I'd made in the last 2 days, and the revisions all pointed the same direction. Up. I put the demon on nights. That first shift told me everything about the labor I'd hired. Sometime past midnight, the gravel rats came back, and not one loaf-sized customer this time. 9 of them, plated, hungry, working the door gap in organized shifts. Somewhere in the last 2 days they had unionized. I counted them through the crack and was still deciding which tankard to sacrifice when the demon stepped over me, opened the door, and swept its open hand once across the threshold. 9 rats went 9 directions. None of them came back down. The door frame cracked from the wind of it, and the demon looked at the crack, looked at me, and had the decency to appear embarrassed. That's what was my product. That was the thing I needed the floor to understand and had no way to advertise. 2 days ago, this creature was ribs and stumps, dying in a hallway. 1 serving of my brew later, it was rearranging the local food chain with 1 hand, and every shard of that power had come out of a barrel I mashed with a torch and a coil of pipe. The margin on that transaction beat anything the guild had ever shipped in my 6 years on their docks, and the guild would never know, because as far as the surface was concerned, this floor was a grave and I was in it. Employment was not smooth. I want that in the ledger. The demon tried to wash tankards its first morning, and I lost 2 of my 12 to enthusiasm, crushed to sand between fingertips that could straighten iron. 10 glasses now. It spent an hour after that arranging the straw packing into a nest shape, which was not a service the shop offered. It also would not stop kneeling. Every time I handed over the ration pour, it went down on the stone, forehead first, and no amount of telling it that this was a wage, not a blessing, made a dent. I gave up on the 3rd try and let the kneeling stand. But the water got hauled, 40 trips a night from the seep down the corridor, a chore that used to eat 1/3 of my working hours. The door stayed hung. The second mash went into the barrel at dusk and came out ready by the time I woke, for hours flat, exactly the discount the panel had promised. I ran the numbers by torchlight. 4 tankards a batch, 2 batches a day now instead of 1, minus the demon's watered ration. 6 sellable servings daily, and a floor full of starving things that had all smelled where the blue light came from by now. For the first time since the teleport circle, my projections had a second page. I was mid-column when the demon did the thing that ended my quiet week. It had been standing its post at the door, still as furniture, when its head came up. It sniffed once, dropped the water skins, and walked into the dark without a word in either direction. Gone an hour. 2. I did not go looking. Whatever was out there had already eaten everything my size that ever went looking, and the shield's drain did not pause for sentiment either way. It came back dragging something. I heard it before I saw it, a grinding scrape on stone, too heavy for any part of the demon itself. It hauled the load through my doorway with both arms, walked it to my counter, and set it down in front of me with the care of a cat delivering a dead bird. Then it stepped back and waited, visibly proud, for a reaction I did not have in stock. A block of ore. Raw, unworked, black past black, a full arm span across, and dense enough that the stone of my countertop creaked under it. Cold came off the thing. Not stored cold. Produced cold, working cold, the chill of something still running on power no one had put into it. Veins threaded through the black, thin, deep set, catching my 1 torch and giving nothing back. 6 years appraising salvage for the guild, and I could price anything a human hand had ever made. I put my palm on that block and my entire professional instrument returned a blank page. No grade, no comparable, no listed origin. The thing hummed against my skin, low and patient, tuned to a market I had never been allowed to see. I tried to lift one end. The end declined. The 1 crate, category mismatch, brewing supplies. Even my own storage refused to touch it. It sat on my counter, drinking the light, humming its 1 long note from somewhere far below the deepest shelf I had access to, and the demon stood over it beaming with a face never designed for the expression. A gift. My first tip from a customer, hauled up out of a dark I could not survive visiting, priced at a number I could not calculate, in a category I could not store. Somewhere down, there was a seam this came from. Somewhere down there, something had cracked this loose. And my one employee, 9 feet of freshly evolved evidence that my product changed food chains, was already turning back toward the doorway with the unmistakable posture of an errand runner who thinks the gift went over well and is about to go get more. By the third block of my shop had a weight problem. The demon had kept its promise. Every night shift ended the same way now, one more slab of that black, cold, humming metal hauled up from somewhere below and set on my counter with pride I hadn't budgeted for. 3 blocks, combined weight, somewhere north of what my countertop was rated for, which I knew because the countertop was starting to file complaints. I couldn't store it, couldn't price it, couldn't work it, and couldn't tell my one employee to stop bringing me treasure because staff morale was the only line item still running a surplus. So when something knocked on my door in the middle of the day, polite, 3 raps and a pause, my first thought was that nothing on this floor had ever knocked. I looked through the crack the rat swarm had left me. 4 feet of stranger looked back. A dwarf. Rock dust crusted into the braids of an auburn beard. 1 iron boot dragging its sole. A cough with gravel in it. He stood in my doorway swaying slightly, amber eyes going past me to the counter, and Eeyore got his attention before I did, which told me his priorities and his profession in one glance. He introduced himself as Brumir, said his clan worked the deep seams 3 galleries down, and asked, with the specific courtesy of a man who has been walking longer than he planned, whether the smell in my corridor was beer. I said it was better than beer. He said there was no such thing. Negotiations were open. I poured him a taste of the staff ration, the watered pour, 1 finger. He held it to the torch, sniffed it the way I appraise salvage, and drank. Then he stood very still for a while, put the tankard down with both hands, and asked what I wanted for a barrel. Here is what I had learned by then about my new market. Coin didn't work. The system recognized shards, and the floor recognized goods, and the sack of surface currency I'd arrived with was worth its weight in sack. When Brumir dug out a purse and started counting discs of stamped gold onto my counter, I pushed the whole stack back at him and watched a career's worth of assumptions fall over behind his eyes. Money was a surface habit. Down here it was a hobby. What I wanted was on the counter, and it weighed 600 pounds. The moment I pointed at the Eeyore blocks, Brumir stopped being a tired refugee and became a professional. He walked the length of the counter twice. He put his ear to the black metal, thumped it with 1 knuckle, and listened to the hum change pitch. He scraped 1 braid ring along the grain and studied the mark it didn't leave. And then he told me, quietly, in the tone dwarves reserve for churches, what the demon had been dropping on my counter every morning. Deep vein or raw off a live seam. His grandfather's generation had worked metal half this dense and had burned out 3 forges learning what it cost. His generation had never held a piece this size. His whole clan could dig for a year, he said, and not show me a fist of it. My employee had been fetching it in armloads. The pack took 1 more pour to close, and it wasn't a sale. A sale would have ended there. I didn't want in or purchase, I wanted in or supply, the whole axis of it, dig, haul, deliver, repeat, and I offered the one payment stream the surface never could. A standing tap, brew, on tap, for the clan, forever, in trade for stone and haulage, and every seam report his diggers could carry. When he understood I meant it in perpetuity, he tried to shake my hand hard enough to relocate it, and I heard the first quoted price of my floor 99 career. Lifetime, he said. Chisel it somewhere. Supply packed registered. Dwarven seems to the void larder. The system, which had watched me refuse gold, apparently approved of barter. Panels stacked up before Brumir's grip had left my fingers. Sovereign smithing, unlocked. Gear crafted from living or evolves with its wearer. Requirement not met, forge facility. A smithing skill priced for kings, delivered to a man whose entire heat inventory was one wall torch. I filed it next to my other ambitions and went back to the part of the business that boiled. Because the real bottleneck had been waiting all week, and its name was storage. 3 or blocks on a groaning counter. 10 tankards for a floor of customers. A one-room shop where the mash barrel, the stock rack, my bedroll, and 600 pounds of humming metal were all learning to coexist. The system had been advertising the fix since the day I arrived, and I finally had the balance to stop ignoring it. Upgrade cost, 2 shards. Reserve, 3 and falling. I paid before I could rerun the math a 5th time. Shop level, 1 to 20. Facility unlocked, storage expansion. The back wall unmade itself. No dust, no noise a demolition deserves, just stone flowing backward, the one room growing a depth it had not owned at breakfast, the new rocks settling into shelves, and the shelves sizing themselves to the exact dimensions of things I already owned. Racking for 40 tankards. A cradle, reinforced, rated for ore. A cellar recess at mash barrel height, cool and dry. My one crate slid into a berth cut for it to the finger width, and I stood in my own stock wall doing the one thing 6 years of warehouse work had never once let me do. Approving of the layout. Shopkeeper level, F to E. The rank panel came last, and the shield noticed before I did. The hum under my skin deepened a note, and the drain deepened with it. E-rank protection, E-rank upkeep. Every promotion in this economy came pre-invoiced, and I had 1 shard and change left to cover it. Tomorrow's batch had better sell. Next morning, the clan's first delivery arrived. 2 young dwarves with a hand sledge, for 100 pounds of ore in cut blocks, a wax-sealed seam report addressed to the beer merchant, and expressions that said Brumir's account of the watered pour had lost nothing in the retelling. The demon signed for the load, by which I mean it loomed over the threshold until the sledge was empty and the dwarves were gone. Commerce. Actual, recurring, scheduled commerce. I racked the blocks, tapped the morning batch, and let myself spend 1 entire minute believing the hard part was behind me. Brumir came back that evening for the first draw on his tab, and the minute expired. He drank the first round telling clan stories with his boots on my new shelving. He drank the second round quieter. Halfway through the third, he stopped in the middle of a story about his grandfather's forge and did not pick it back up, and when I looked over from the barrel, the amber eyes had gone somewhere 3 galleries down. The seams were dying, he said. Not played out. Dying. Alive seam hums, and gallery by gallery, over the last 2 years, the deep veins had gone quiet, or turning brittle and hollow and gray, the way nothing in his clan's records said or could do. The dwarves fed themselves on what the seams paid. 40 diggers had become 31 this year. The clan had sent him up floor as a last resort, hunting rumors of anything that could turn a trade, and he had found me, and he was glad past speech for the tab, and none of it changed the arithmetic he'd been walking with for 2 seasons. The seams his people lived on were going dark, one by one, from the bottom up. I looked at my stocked shelves, at the 400 pounds of or my new trade route had delivered that morning, at the first supply chain I had ever owned end to end. Then I looked at the man on the other side of my counter, doing what I'd been doing since the day the gold circle dropped me here. Counting the days left in a number that only went down. My supply chain was 2 days old, and its source was already dying, and somewhere under my feet, whatever made alive seem go quiet was still down there, working its way up. The sound arrived an hour after close, and it was not footsteps. Footsteps have a count. This was a tide. A dry, clicking, million-legged tide, coming up the corridor from the low end of the floor, and by the time I got to the door crack, the torchlight was already finding the front edge of it. Chitin. Knee-high bodies in interlocking plates, eyeless heads, mandibles working the air, packed wall to wall, and layered 3 deep, and behind the front rank the corridor just kept going, motion all the way down into the dark past anything I could count. My inventory instinct tried anyway. It got to 400 and gave notice. The demon put itself in the doorway without being told. 9 feet of my entire security budget, knuckles down, and for the first time since its evolution, I watched it hesitate. Not at one insect. At the arithmetic. It could swat 50 an hour until its arms wore out and the tide would not notice, and both of us knew it, and it planted itself in my door anyway. I hired that for a watered tankard a day. Somewhere in the last week the wage had stopped explaining what it was still standing there for. The swarm did not attack. That was the strange part. It arrived, pulled around my doorway in a slow whirl, and waited, mandibles all working the same rhythm, and the front rank kept lifting their heads toward the stock shelf where the morning batch sat cooling. They had smelled the brewery from however far down Chitin smells things. They were starving. Floor 99's entire food chain was starving. I was beginning to understand, and I had opened the only kitchen. The problem was checkout. My whole operation was built on one customer at a time. One tankard, one evolution, one payment, next in line. Serving this crowd by the glass would take a season I didn't have and a stock I couldn't brew, and the first time the line got impatient, the line was coming through my wall. Selling to them one by one wasn't slow. It was impossible. So I stopped looking at 10,000 customers and started looking for the one that mattered, because nothing moves in perfect shared rhythm without something keeping the beat. I watched the whirl for an hour from the door crack. Every circuit, the flow bent around the same point back in the dark, the way water bends around a stone. Big dim shape, not moving, attended on all sides. A queen. The swarm wasn't 10,000 mouths. It was one mouth with 10,000 hands, and it did all its thinking in scent. Scent I could manufacture. Scent was practically my trade now. Recipe available, pheromone bread. Requires spent mash, water, heat. The system had been reading over my shoulder again, and for once its timing was flawless. Spent mash I had in buckets, the sweet used grain from 6 batches I hadn't found a use for. Heat, 1 torch and a flat stone. I ground, mixed, and baked through the whole night shift, and the demon hauled water, and the loaves came off the stone dense and dark and reeking, each one carrying the brew's signature under the crust, the exact scent the swarm had followed up floor, concentrated into something with a shelf life. I didn't sell the first loaf. I stacked 40 of them on the empty delivery sledge, and the demon walked the sledge out past the front rank, straight down the lane the swarm opened for it, and set the whole load down in front of the queen. One trade. Wholesale. Take it, or take my wall down. The dark went quiet. Then the mandibles started, 10,000 at once, and the sound of the hive eating was the sound of rain moving across a roof, and I stood in my doorway listening to my entire flower reserve disappear in 4 minutes. The light started at the queen and moved outward. Blue, underplate, one body at a time, and then in waves, rank after rank down the corridor. The same light I'd seen crack open a rat and rebuild a demon, now running to the horizon of my torch and past it, deep into the dark, lighting the tunnel from inside the animals themselves. The plating on the front rank thickened as I watched. Drones the size of dogs came out of it the size of wolves. The queen's dim shape rose off the stone on new legs and kept rising. Mass evolution, 214 subjects. Payment received, 21 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 22. 214 evolutions in one transaction. 21 shards. More currency than my entire operating history combined, invoiced in the time it takes bread to be gone. My shield could run for months on the reserve I collected standing still in my own doorway, watching the tunnel glow. Brumir had come up for his evening draw in the middle of it and stopped dead on the threshold with the tankard halfway to his mouth. "God's below," he said, and put the tankard down and did not pick it up again until the light finished, which for a dwarf on a lifetime tab was the strongest reaction available. The demon knelt, forehead to the stone, the full landlord posture, and this time it wasn't kneeling at me. And from the corridor the hive answered the light with a sound I had no entry for, every body scraping its plates in the same slow pulse, over and over, aimed at my door. Awe from the dwarf, worship from the tide, and from my one employee, something in between that I decided not to look at directly. Faction loyalty registered, the hive. The swarm didn't leave. It reorganized. By morning the corridor was a perimeter, drones stationed in overlapping rings 100 feet out in every direction, and the first thing the new arrangement did was intercept the dwarven or sledge, inspect it, and escort it to my door in formation. The two young dwarves handled this development with great professionalism, if white knuckles count as professionalism. I had gone to sleep a shopkeeper with one employee. I woke up a supply depot with a standing army. I paid in bread. I spent the day scaling. Second baking stone. Mash schedule doubled, staggered against loaf production. The hive ate scraps and hauled anything a drone could lift, and the shelving finally started to look stocked instead of hopeful. It was, by every number in my dust ledger, the best day of my professional life. The plume was the part one didn't price in. 40 loaves and a mass evolution had put a scent column into the floor's air that my little bakery never could have alone. Brew and bread and hive sign all braided together. And air moves down there, slow and patient, along the tunnels and down the shafts and into the deep galleries where the seams had gone dark. I found out around midnight, when the perimeter went silent. Not quiet, silent. 10,000 bodies stopped moving between one breath and the next, every drone flattened to the stone, feelers down. The demon came off the door with its new claws out. Bromir's tankard stopped halfway again, and this time nothing about it was funny. From below, a long way below, through the rock under my boots, something knocked. Once. Slow. The countertop or hummed an answer, one clear rising note, and 400 pounds of the densest metal a dwarf had ever handled buzzed against my racking while the knock rolled through the floor a second time. Closer. The hive had followed the scent up from 3 galleries down. The scent hadn't stopped at 3 galleries. Something at the very bottom of the dark had a nose too, and it was on the stairs. The knock came back the second night, and this time it kept its appointment. It climbed the deep stair one weight at a time, unhurried, and the hive felled it before I did. 10,000 bodies went flat to the stone in a wave that started at the low corridor and rolled up to my door, feelers down, the exact posture they had taken the night my brewery smell first reached the dark. The demon came off its post without being told and filled the doorway, knuckles to the floor. Bromir put his tankard down for the second time that week, which from a dwarf on a lifetime tab is the loudest alarm the species owns. I got down to the door crack and looked. One shape this time, not a swarm. It filled the corridor wall to wall the way water fills a pipe. Pale, eyeless, segmented, a deep gallery thing that had never needed light in its life, and had come up 3 galleries chasing a smell it had no word for. Long past feral, and still climbing on its own. The system marked it, thought about it, and added a warning glyph that clearly cost extra. Deep gallery predator, danger class, notable. Direct defense assessment, insufficient. It had come the way everything on this floor came to me now. Starving. 6 years of warehouse instinct said bar the door. The door was oak and scrap iron and sentiment, and against the thing on the stair, it was a strongly worded note. So I did the other thing. The move the contract had spent a month teaching me was the only one I actually owned. I stopped filing the pale thing as a threat and started filing it as a customer who had not yet been served. The ceiling, it turned out, had been holding out on me. My shop had come with defenses I had never gone looking for, dormant behind panels of obsidian I had mistaken for ordinary wall. Waking them cost nothing. The place had bought them long ago in a fee I never read the small print on. for brass barrels unfolded over the threshold on jointed black arms and swept the corridor, green across the demon, green across the flattened hive, then a long red hold on the pale thing at the edge of my torchlight. Automatic defense turrets, online. Engagement rule, hostile entry only. Not to kill it. The contract does not let me kill anything, and the turrets keep the contract's manners on my behalf. Red only meant that if it crossed my line uninvited, the line would answer, and the thing could feel that the way an animal feels a change in the weather. It stopped at the edge of the light. Hungry, not stupid. So we did business across the chalk. I did not have a recipe for whatever it was. I had a recipe for hunger, which is the one thing every customer this floor has ever walked in holding. I filled a tankard with the real neon blue, no watered ration, top shelf, and the demon carried it out on the sledge and set it at the chalk line and came back. Then I stepped behind the crate I call a counter and let the smell handle the negotiation my hands are not allowed to. The pale thing studied the tankard for a long while. Then it drank the way the deep drinks, all of it at once, and the corridor lit from the inside. I had watched a rat molt and a demon detonate. This was neither. The light climbed the segments one plate at a time, front to back, farther than my torch reached, and then farther than that, and the pale hide darkened and hardened and grew a grain like poured stone. The eyeless head lifted off the floor on a body that had decided, mid-evolution, to stop being blind. New eyes opened along its crown, pale, cold, and aimed, for the first time in whatever counted as its life, at a light it had come toward on purpose. Evolution jump, feral tier to ascended tier. Payment received, 6 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 22 to 28. 6 shards for one customer. More than the demon, less than the hive, and paid by a thing that an hour earlier every number in my shop had rated as the end of the business. It looked at me across the chalk and at the empty tankard and did the arithmetic every customer does at closing. Then it did the thing I had not budgeted for, which was leave, back down the stair, into the deep it had come from, at a walk. Not driven off. Dismissed, by its own read of the accounts. It had gotten what it climbed for, and it had somewhere colder to be. The demon watched it go with an expression I chose not to interpret. I want the plain mechanics of that in the record, because the mechanics are the only part one trusts. 2 nights running, the deep dark had sent up my stair a thing that could have taken my wall down. It went home a paying customer, 2 tiers higher, owing me nothing and me owing it nothing, and the corridor between here and the bottom of the floor now had one more thing walking it that associated the smell of my shop with the best hour of its life. I did not gain a guard. I gained a market I had written off as a grave. That, as near as I can tell, is the whole of the trick I do. I spent the next day making the doorway honest. The turrets tracked motion to 30 paces past the threshold, farther with a hive drone relaying, and obeyed exactly one instruction, which was the contract's and not mine. They would not fire through a loyal body, would not fire past the shop's claimed boundary, and would not, under any phrasing I tried, fire on command. Clever, the contract allows. Satisfying, it does not. So I marked the floor in chalk dust instead. Entry lane, supplier lane, hive return, demon post, and turned the killing ground to a loading dock. And when Brumir accused me of making a battlefield look like a warehouse, I took it as the compliment it accidentally was. The system flagged him amber on the first sweep, pending supplier verification, and he took it personally enough to tell the panel where it could file the verification. It cleared the instant I thumbed him onto the counter as strategic labor, a title he called an insult, and then, I noticed, did not ask me to remove. The surface arrived just after the second lane dried. Not from below. From above, the one direction I had stopped watching. The air changed before anything else did, cleaner and perfumed, carrying the expensive oil smell surface adventurers used to pretend their armor does not sweat. The hive split down the center of the corridor without a sound, not retreating, only opening a lane the way a knife opens cloth. A man walked down it like he owned the dark. White reinforced coat over silver scale. Every plate stamped with a guild inspection mark. Mirror-bright boots. Wardstones set into his gloves. Surface issue. Each one worth a dock cruise year, and every one of them less used down here than Bromir's left boot. A pearl pommel short sword, a heat baffle cloak of the cut the guild hands its C-rank surveyors when it wants a map and would rather not pay the death benefit. I knew the badge before I read the face. 6 years sorting crates teaches you every crest that ever got priority handling while your own pay sat in review, and this one belonged to Valerius's survey office. Which meant the surface no longer merely suspected the grave had begun producing invoices. It had sent someone down to read them. He stopped a stride short of my chalk and looked past all of it, past the demon in the doorframe, past the hive gone silent along the walls, past 4 turrets holding him in a red they were only declining to act on, and looked at me. A lean man in a charcoal apron, sleeves rolled, flower on one cuff, wearing the face of a clerk who had just found a fresh reason to dislike a customer. He recited me from memory, and he was good at it. Fired logistics clerk. Combat null. Worst license class. Presumed dead in a contract misfire. He had the file cold. What he did not have was the only line that mattered, the one the file could not hold, because the surface kept no column for it. He was still reciting when a shell back came up the supplier lane to settle its weekly account. Nothing dramatic, a routine draw, a bonded courier paying 1 shard for the next pour, the smallest transaction my board runs. The customer drank, the light flushed under its plating, the panel logged the shard, and it clicked back out past the surveyor's mirror boots without a glance. The whole thing took the time it takes to pour. I watched him watch it. I watched a man see a monster hand a combat null clerk the one currency his entire guild would burn a Florida bottle and file it, in real time, behind his eyes, as a clerk playing shop in a cellar. It must be restful, being that wrong on a schedule. His kit was good, which was the irritating part. Cut wards, heat wards, a polish enchantment aggressive enough to blind a rat. It was elite by every standard the surface keeps, which is to say overbuilt, overpriced, and 3 dozen floors from the only channel that could ever repair it. The demon's claws had been rebuilt by a single tankard. The hive's plates had thickened on bread scraps. Bromir's or changes temperature when it is insulted. Set beside things that grow, his elite kit looked less like armament and more like a museum case with opinions. I told him, without raising my voice, that his sword was bleeding its stored charge through a hairline crack in the pommel setting, and that the ward on his left boot had been counterfeited with plated tin under the silver. He checked the boot. That was the whole victory, not the correction, the instinct. He checked because some part of him already knew I was right, and then hated me for making him prove it in front of his own porters. Appraisal confirmed. Evolution Shard Reserve, 26. No reward panel. The reserve had only ticked down a day's upkeep since the deep sale, the shield sipping its 2 whether I earned praise or swallowed it. The number that went up was the amount of contempt a rich man had to hold in his mouth in public, and the system has never once paid that one out in shards. He recovered fast, professionals do. He set his toes just outside my chalk, gave the room a last slow scan, and made his rulings. The turrets were decorative pipe. The hive were scavengers cowed by his cloak. The demon was bad torchlight. And I was still what the file said, what Valerius had set across a mahogany desk on the last ordinary afternoon of my old life, a man of no measurable value, running a shop of the same. He told me the guild would be reclaiming its property shortly. He said I had done a charming job pretending this cellar was a business, but that pretend commerce did not survive contact with real authority, that he would be recommending a full survey party, which, in a surveyor's mouth, means a great many armed men and a date. Then he looked past my shoulder at the crate, the racks, the single torch, and spent the word he had been saving like the last course of a meal. Trash. He had no idea the corridor behind him had closed. The scout discovered the guards about 3 seconds after calling my shop trash. That is not enough time for character growth, but it is ample for facial education. The hive closed behind him in layered silence. The demon leaned out of the doorframe, horns scraping the upper stone. For turrets lowered and found the gaps in his expensive coat with the bored certainty of an auditor finding fraud. He did not cross my chalk. Credit where it is due. His survival instincts had passed a certification his manners never sat. He left backing away, one mirror boot at a time, narrating the retreat to himself as a survey adjustment, and the hive walked him to the upper bend without touching him, because fear does the hauling for free and fear is lighter than a corpse. When the corridor settled, I found what he had dropped. Not a weapon, not coin. A survey spool, thin brass casing, crystal needle, vellum tape wound inside and marked with safe routes, monster heat signatures, and resource notes from every floor he had crossed coming down. Guild property, beautifully made, poorly secured. My favorite kind of expensive. The tape showed one route I could use and one problem I could not ignore. 3 galleries up, above the dwarven seams, a pocket forest had pushed through the rock around an old spawn point. The guild's own notes called it a dead grove and marked it do not enter in a surveyor's tidy hand. Bromir read the same marks over my shoulder and went quiet, which is how I have learned to tell the genuinely bad news from the merely expensive. World tree sap. Not the real world tree. If that were down here, the surface would have sent an army, a priesthood, and 12 committees to ruin it. This was a dungeon's imitation, grown from old root memory around the spawn point, and when the system heard the name, it opened a recipe list long enough to make my eyes water. Ingredient identified, world tree sap. Use, advanced tonics, living gear primer, stability agents. Warning, ancient Treant spawn cluster. There it was, the next bottleneck, politely labeled. I needed the sap for 2 things, and getting it meant sending the one person I had been putting off ever sending anywhere. She came in from the western passage near dusk, the way she had come in at dusk every day since before the hive, and for the first time the ledger had a reason to keep her at the counter instead of the breach. I should put her in the record properly, because I never have. 6 feet of sentinel in midnight blue plate with gold trim, silver hair tied high and gone white at the crown with rock dust, violet eyes sharp enough to make the turrets hesitate a half beat before they cleared her green. A gray cape missing another strip. She was the first thing I saved down here on purpose. Not a customer, not payroll, not a transaction I could tuck inside a ledger and feel clever about. In my first week, before I understood the shield or the shards or any of it, she had crawled out of a western collapse half dead, and the first tankard I ever brewed had steadied her enough to hold the breach shut while whatever chased her lost interest and went hungry somewhere else. She had held that breach every day since, alone, on a wage of 1 pour and no thanks, while the floor got loud in the other direction and I got busy keeping the loud part fed. Her name is Kaelith. The floor calls her the fallen sentinel, when the floor is feeling grand. I call her the reason the western wall has never once been my problem. Now she stood at my counter while I worked out what the grove would cost. The sap solved both my bottlenecks, and neither cheaply. Tonics brewed on it would push Kaelith past holding a wall and into taking the field, which I needed, because a guardian who can only defend one doorway is a guardian I have to build my whole floor around. And the living gear primer the recipe unlocked was the first ingredient Sovereign Smithing had ever actually asked me for. No primer, no evolving armor, no evolving armor, no guardian who survives the next thing bigger than the last thing. The forge to fire it I still did not own. That book could wait. The primer could not. Passive waiting would have been the easy choice. Stay behind the shield, bake bread, let the floor bring me whatever smelled desperate enough. Easy choices, down here, have a way of turning into coffins with better inventory. So I built a run without setting one boot outside my shop. The contract forbids me leaving. It says nothing against logistics. If anything, it begs for them. I had hive relays, a demon that carries stone slabs like serving trays, Bromir's seam maps, and a survey spool stolen off a man who irons his cloak to trespass in a death floor. And I had Kaelith, who drank 2 vials of the new batch at my counter. Advanced tonic batch, 6 vials. Effects: vitality reinforcement, perception focus, fatigue decay reduced. Duration: 2 hours. And stopped being a woman holding a wall and started being the point of the spear. The liquid was not the neon glory of the Suds. It came out dark, almost green under the foam, and it smelled like grass after lightning, which is an alarming thing to brew in a stone room that has never once met weather. The run moved in layers, and I ran it the way I run everything, from behind the counter with one hand on the spool. Hive scouts went first, small drones with chalk capsules strapped under their plates, laying a dotted line up 3 galleries so nothing behind them had to guess. The demon went second, a reinforced cask and 3 coil lines across its shoulders like a porter who could bench a door. Kaelith walked at the center, not as bait, as the one piece on the board allowed to decide things in the moment. Bromir stayed with me and corrected the guild's map as the drones reported it, stabbing the vellum with a chisel every time the surveyor's shorthand offended his sense of stone. I stood at my counter and watched the whole thing arrive as smears. That is the part one had not braced for. The hive relay does not carry a picture. It carries pressure, scent, the drum of feet through rock, and dust marks copied back by drones every 30 heartbeats. And out of that I had to build a map of a fight happening 3 galleries over my head, and make each call a half-minute after it stopped being current. Turn left at the split. Low ceiling past the mineral fall. Heat pocket at the dead roots. Do not touch the pale moss, underlined twice, because I have learned the price of the obvious rule written too quietly. Evolution shard reserve, 22. Remote route integrity, 74%. The drain did not pause for management, however heroic the management got. The shield keeps a rate. Rates do not develop compassion. 2 galleries up and a day and a half gone, and I was still at my counter, timing a war I could smell and not see. The first treant came onto the relay as a shape too slow to be alive, right up until it moved too fast to be a tree. They are not trees with faces. That would be almost charming. And this floor keeps a strict policy against charm. They are root masses wound around old bone, tall enough to scrape a gallery ceiling, bark plated in black-green scale, every branch tipped with a hooked growth that remembers having been a claw. The panel marked them ascended and added the expensive glyph. The grove woke in pieces, 1 trunk turning, then 3, then the whole pocket forest shifting its weight at once. And the route map I had spent a day and a half building lost all meaning, because the walls had started to walk. Kaelith spent the first tonic exactly right. She did not charge. Charging a treant is how a person becomes mulch with a sword in it. She cut angles. She let the demon bait the heavy swings, ducked under a branch the width of my counter as it came down, and split my chalked map in 2. And drove her blade into the joint where root met trunk, where the wood was youngest, and the sap ran nearest the skin. Violet light ran the length of the edge every time it bit. Behind her the drones swarmed the wounds she opened, clamping pressure lines onto blisters she had cut on purpose, and the whole grisly operation resolved, on my counter, into one clean instruction I could actually act on. Keep her standing, keep her fast, keep the demon between her and anything with a backswing. My job was timing, and timing was the whole of what I had. Vial 2 into the coil line at the first fatigue spike. I felt it as a stumble in the relay, her feet losing the drum for half a beat, and I sent the dose before my eyes had finished reading why. Focus powder when her perception reading sagged and a hooked branch swung in from a blind angle she could not have seen and, a half-second behind the powder, clearly did. Pullback signal the instant the demon's shoulder plate cracked, because I needed it to stop eating blows meant to buy her time. I have run a loading dock on quote a day. This was the same job with a worse penalty for a late shipment. We did not kill a treant. That was never the job, and I had grown allergic to unpaid heroics. We harvested. The demon drove the cask spike into a sap blister the size of a barrel. The drones locked the clamps. Kaelith held the open lane, one blade and one cracked pauldron between the cask and the grove, while the first gold-green stream hit the inside of the cask and lit every panel in my shop at once. World Tree Sap, 12 liters acquired. Recipe branch unlocked, living gear primer. There it was, the milestone. The next market, and the ingredient the forge had been waiting on, the thing the Surveyors Guild had walked straight past because it only knew how to take ground and file reports about whatever killed them on the way in. Then the largest treant moved. The relay went white before I understood it. Boromir swore without words, which is a separate dwarven dialect and a worse omen than the spoken kind. Through the smear, I caught Kaelith turning the wrong way, toward the cask and away from cover, putting herself between 2 centuries of secured sap and a branch as thick as my counter, raising her blade to redirect a blow no steel that had already survived this much was going to redirect. The impact came through the relay as one white smear and a sound the drones had no business carrying home. Back in the shop, every turret snapped toward the dark and found nothing to do at that range. The shield hummed around me alone, loyal and useless. The cask's signal stayed green. The sap was secured. Kaelith was not. Guardian status, alive. Armor integrity, 41% to 17%. Critical fracture, breastplate, right pauldron, spine brace. Evolution shard reserve, 18. The last thing before the relay cut was a still frame a drone caught and carried home in its chalk. Kaelith on one knee under a storm of falling black leaves, one arm still up. Midnight blue plate cracked open along the gold trim like something had tried to file her out of her own armor, and the ancient treant already drawing back for the blow meant to finish what the first one started. I had the sap. I had the primer. I had sovereign smithing locked behind a forge I did not own and could not build tonight. And 3 galleries up, the only person I had ever pulled out of the dark on purpose had 100 weight of dying would winding up to swing again, and every fast thing I could send was going to arrive slower than that branch. Kaelith came back alive, which was the only number that mattered until I had finished being furious. The demon carried her through the door just before the relay died completely, one arm under her shoulders, one around the cask of World Tree Sap, because my employee had developed the charming habit of respecting cargo priority even during disasters. Hive drones flooded behind them in ragged lines. 31 did not return. The cask did. Kaelith did. Her armor looked like someone had tried to open it with a millstone. I put the sap in reinforced storage and Kaelith on the cot. I called a cot because naming it a pile of folded sacks felt bad for morale. Her breathing stayed even. The tonics kept her pulse steady. The armor, however, was finished. Midnight blue plates split along the gold trim. The spine brace hung by 2 bent pins. One more treant blow would have turned protection into shrapnel. World Tree Sap, 12 liters stored. Living gear primer, available. Requirement not met, forge facility. The system enjoyed repeating bad news in clean formatting. Boromir spent an hour examining the cracks without touching them, which told me the damage was worse than any profanity would have. Sovereign smithing could solve it. Deep vein could solve it. World Tree Sap could bind the living lattice. All we lacked was heat strong enough to convince abyssal metal it was negotiable. So naturally, before I could solve the forge problem, another merchant tried to solve me. He arrived under a truce banner made from molted serpent hide and bad taste. Tall, narrow, wrapped in layered black leather that smelled of oil, dust, and money handled too often. He brought 6 porters, none human, each muzzled with silver wire and marked by ownership brands that made the demon's claws flex against the doorframe. Behind them padded 3 caged beasts with covered eyes and chained jaws. The hive did not block him. That concerned me. Anything that made 10,000 insects choose legal observation over immediate inconvenience deserved attention. He presented himself as a dealer in restricted goods. He did not give a name. Black market people rarely do, as if anonymity becomes mystical when paired with perfume and a ledger full of crimes. His route tokens were real. His supply samples were useful. His morals were not visibly present. He wanted world tree sap. Of course he did. The scent had not had time to reach the surface, but rumor moved faster than air when profit carried it. He offered relic blades, old guild wardstones, contract inks, and 2 sealed jars of phoenix ash that were either priceless or colored flour. I refused all of it because my shop did not run on shiny lies. I needed shards, or labor, and heat. He smiled like a man who had expected the answer and enjoyed the shape of his backup plan. The cage beasts were unveiled. Basilisk whelps. Not full-grown. Still bad. Stone green scales, 6 legs each, lids sewn half shut to keep their gaze from petrifying whatever idiot stood in front of them. Feral tier, according to the panel, but notable dangerous. Their evolution payout hovered in my vision before I even opened my mouth. Potential transaction, 3 subjects. Feral tier to bonded tier available. Projected payment, 9 evolution shards. My reserve had fallen while I was busy keeping people alive. Evolution shard reserve, 16. Safety shield upkeep, 2 shards/day. 16 was not panic. 16 was the amount of money a careful man starts calling capital because calling it a countdown makes breakfast difficult. 9 more would buy time, and time was the only product I never had in stock. The dealer's first contract was garbage. I know garbage. I sorted guild purchase orders for 6 years. This one was premium garbage, written in purple ink on treated vellum, with 3 clauses that said sap and mint my rights, 2 clauses that said partnership and mint ownership, and 1 lovely little line that would have assigned all byproducts of the transaction to the purchaser. Evolution shards counted as byproducts if you tilted your head and hated decency. I set it on the counter and let the system look. Hostile clause detected. Skill unlock condition met. Attempted contractual predation inside registered shop. Contract negotiation unlocked. The interface changed. Until that moment, the shopkeeper's contract had felt like a cage with good shielding. No leaving the dungeon. No attacking. No breaking the rules. A very expensive leash tied to a very dangerous room. Contract negotiation showed me the other side of the bars. Registered shop boundary. Offer. Acceptance. Consideration. Hostility definitions. Payment priority. Penalty escrow. Every concept appeared as a cold white line over the counter. Not magic exactly. More like the universe had admitted commerce was a weapon if sharpened correctly. I wrote a new agreement. No sap sale. Trial tonic only. 3 whelps, 1 dose each, administered on premises. Payment upon successful evolution, calculated by system rate, held before release. No ownership claim over byproducts. No hostile action by buyer, porters, beasts, tools, poisons, curses, or implied agents within the shop boundary. Breach penalty. All posted collateral forfeited. Delivery premium. Negotiable after proof of solvency. The dealer read it. His smile thinned. That was how I knew I was learning. He signed because greed is a door that opens from the inside. His beast drank because the tonic smelled like a better body. The first whelp seized, scales flushing blue-green under stone hide, sewn lids splitting cleanly as new membranes formed beneath them. It grew antler-like brow ridges and stopped pulling against its chain. The second followed. The third took longer, rattling hard enough to crack one floor tile before its spine settled and its 6 legs aligned into something less frantic and more lethal. Evolution successful, basilisk whelp 3 times. Monster tier, feral tier to bonded tier. Payment received, 9 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 16 to 25. Numbers up. Beautiful, practical numbers. My shield bought time. Kaelith's future armor moved from impossible to merely expensive. Bromir stopped glowering at the damaged breastplate long enough to study the contract panel with professional respect. The dealer tried to breach on the release. Not loudly. Professionals rarely do. One porter shifted a silver wire from muzzle to wrist, a transfer mark designed to reclaim the evolved beast before the payment finalized. The old me would have missed it. The porter's wire snapped. The dealer's route tokens, wardstones, and 2 jars of possibly fake phoenix ash slid across the counter into shop custody. The basilisk whelps froze, not from fear, but from enforcement. They could not attack. The dealer could not order them to attack. I had not swung a fist, raised a blade, or so much as flicked a spoon at anyone, and yet the most dangerous person in the room was suddenly the man with the paperwork. That was when I understood it. The contract was not just the reason I was trapped down here. It was the only law on a floor that had forgotten laws existed. Inside my boundary, the system cared about terms. It cared about consent. It cared about payment order. I could not fight, but I could make violence unprofitable, and in a dungeon economy that was nearly the same thing with cleaner hands. I spent the afternoon rewriting every standing arrangement. Hive ration terms. Dwarven delivery protections. Demon staff wage. Hazard premiums for deep route sourcing. Emergency medical priority for loyal personnel. Brummer complained about the number of thumbprints required and then insisted on reading the dwarf clauses twice, which was how he said thank you without damaging his reputation. By close, the reserves still read 25. The shield hummed. Kaelith slept. The basilisk whelps left calmer than they had entered, and the dealer's smile had gone sharp enough to cut paper. He returned alone after the porters cleared the corridor. This time he did not bring samples. He brought a black case, lacquered, warded, and heavy with the kind of silence rich people purchase when they want a crime to feel formal. He placed it on my counter and opened it. Inside were evolution shards. More than 9. More than 25. Enough red-blue facets to make the shield hum harder under my skin. The dealer rested one gloved hand beside the case and offered to buy the shopkeeper's contract itself. For one stupid second, I saw the cage again. Then contract negotiation lit every shard in the case with a projected premium calculation, and I realized he had just named the one thing in the dungeon expensive enough to charge anything I wanted. I did not sell the contract. I did charge the dealer for wasting my evening with a number large enough to make his left eye twitch. Contract negotiation called it a consultation premium. I called it tuition. He paid 4 evolution shards, transferred 3 restricted route claims, and left with the stiff posture of a man who had walked in hunting a fool and found a fee schedule. Contract premium received for evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 25 to 29. No badge, no fanfare, just capital, which was rarer than praise and more useful than revenge. One route claim mattered immediately. The dealer had owned a heat right in the basalt galleries under the dying seams, a stupid surface phrase for a place where the rock stayed liquid and anything without a heat ward became soup with regrets. Bromir saw the mark on the vellum and stopped insulting the dealer long enough to breathe through his nose. The basalt gallery touched a lava beast's territory. The system did not offer a cheerful recipe this time. It offered a requirement. Sovereign smithing, forge facility required. Forge candidate, obsidian forge. Required inputs, deep vein ore, world tree sap primer, living heat source. Living heat source was the phrase that ruined breakfast. Simple brewing had carried me farther than any fired clerk had a right to go. Grain, culture, heat, patience. It had made a rat into a plated courier, a demon into staff, and a hive into a loyal perimeter. But Kaelith's broken armor lay across my workbench in 3 cracked sections, and no amount of mash was going to weld a spine brace back into trustworthy shape. We needed a forge. Brumir became impossible in the focused way craftsmen become impossible when their grief finds work. He stripped the damaged armor down plate by plate, sorted every broken rivet, and lined the deep vein or blocks by grain direction. He had been drinking less since Kaelith came back wounded. That concerned me on humanitarian grounds and inventory grounds, not necessarily in that order. The forge site chose itself. The back right wall of the level 20 shop had a cold spot where the obsidian thickened around an old vent seam. When Brumir struck it with a chisel, the whole room answered in a low note, the same pitch as the ore. The demon put one hand against the wall and pulled away fast. Heat under cold stone. A sleeping throat. I authorized excavation under supplier's supervision, which meant Brumir shouted at everyone until the wall behaved. Hive drones carved channels with mandibles. The demon hauled stone out in slabs. I painted world tree sap primer into the seams as they opened, and the sap sank into the obsidian like rain into dry earth. Green gold veins spread through black rock, then cooled to a deep ember line. The one crate refused all forge materials, of course, because it was still category locked and petty. By midday, we had a hollow in the wall, an ore cradle, and no heat worth the name. By dusk, the lava beast arrived to complain. It came up through the basalt route without using the door, which I considered rude but educational. The floor behind the counter bulged orange, cracked, and open like wax. A horn shape pulled itself out of the molten slit, broad as a wagon, plated in black volcanic glass with red heat leaking between the joints. Its head was half bull, half furnace door, and all of it smelled like burned metal. The system marked it as an ascended tier lava beast, notable dangerous, unaffiliated, hostile under negotiation. The turrets tracked it and immediately produced an error. Target heat exceeds turret tolerance. Automatic defense turrets, standby. Wonderful. My free ceiling guns had opinions about workplace safety. The lava beast lowered its head over my half-built forge and exhaled. The stone glowed. 3 hive drones fainted, or whatever insects do when their legs become theory. Brumir planted himself between the beast and the armor plates with a hammer in each hand, for feet of stocky outrage facing a walking volcano. The beast did not attack. It inspected. That made it worse. An attacker has a shape. A customer with standards can ruin your whole week. It judged the ore cradle. It judged the vent. It judged Brumir's hammer, then Brumir, and somehow made the order insulting. The system translated intent instead of speech, which spared me the acoustics of a furnace trying to form consonants. The beast controlled the basalt heat right. It would not trade ember, slag glass, or vent access unless my forge could hold its breath for one full cycle without cracking. In other words, match the heat or stop wasting its time. Brumir took that as a personal attack against every ancestor he had ever respected. I took it as a vendor requirement with a lethal warranty clause. The first test failed in 6 seconds. The lava beast exhaled into the hollow. The sap veins flared bright green, the deep vein cradles sang, and the outer lip fractured in 3 places. Brumir slapped sealing clay into the cracks with his bare palms. I pulled him back by the apron before his skin remembered it was attached to flesh. Forge integrity, 31%. Heat match, failed. The second test failed in 12 seconds. Better, but better is one of those words that does not comfort a man watching his entire supply chain melt. We adjusted. More sap primer in the side channels. Deep vein or shaved thin and layered like scales around the vent mouth. Hive wax as a temporary sealant, which smoked blue and made the demon sneeze hard enough to rattle the turret housings. Bromir changed hammer rhythm, not harder, smarter, striking where the metal wanted to settle instead of where anger wanted to land. The third test reached 28 seconds. Forge integrity, 64%. Heat match, partial. The lava beast's eyes narrowed, molten lines brightening between glass plates. I could feel its contempt from across the room. It had probably watched a century of desperate miners try to borrow its heat and leave as ash. Now a dwarf with a beer tab and a clerk with contract powers were asking it to respect a wall alcove. Fair. Still expensive. The reserve dropped while we worked. One day gone. 2 shards eaten by the shield. No pity, no pause. Evolution shard reserve, 27. Safety shield, online. I wanted to hate the drain. I did hate the drain. I also watched Bromir stand within arm's reach of living magma because my shield did not extend to him, and I understood the ugly side of protection. The contract made me hard to kill. It did not make anyone near me safe. That had to be built by hand, paid in parts, and tested before the next treant turned Kaelith into a cautionary invoice. Test 4 held. Not gracefully. The forge screamed. The vents seam opened wider, and the deep vein or around the mouth went from black to white to a color my eyes refused to keep. Bromir struck the cradle pins in sequence. The sap veins flashed green, then red, then settled into a steady inner glow. The lava beast exhaled harder, trying to break it out of pride or quality assurance. Same thing, really. The obsidian forge held 1 full cycle. Facility integrated, the obsidian forge. Sovereign smithing, active. Living gear workbench, unlocked. The back wall reshaped around the forge, opening a capability the structure had apparently been holding in reserve since the day I first paid to widen it. Stone flowed into tool slots, or racks lowered. A quench basin filled with black mineral water so cold it steamed beside the heat. Kaelith's broken armor plates rose from the workbench on thin brackets, waiting for a smith. Bromir looked 10 years younger and twice as dangerous. The lava beast looked annoyed. It paid the trade in a glob of heart ember sealed inside volcanic glass, enough living heat to keep the forge awake between visits. Then it planted 1 burning hoof beside Bromir's hammer and issued a challenge the system translated with unnecessary drama. Crafting contest proposed. Title at stake, Master Forge. Participants, Bromir Iron Gulp versus Ascended Tier Lava Beast. Bromir did not ask me for permission. The Lava Beast did not ask me for terms. Both of them turned toward the obsidian forge like men about to settle a religious dispute with tools. Kaelith's armor lay cracked between them, the first piece on the bench. The duel for Master Forge began before I had written a single liability clause. Bromir won the duel by losing less. That was his phrasing afterward, delivered through a beard singed at both ends and eyebrows that had entered the historical record. The lava beast shaped heat better. Bromir shaped purpose better. After 6 hours at the obsidian forge, the beast produced a perfect slag glass blade that could cut stone by remembering it used to be liquid. Bromir produced 1 reinforced spine brace for Kaelith's armor that did not crack when the lava beast stepped on it. The system took its time judging, which was rude to everyone with burns. Crafting contest complete. Forge authority, shared. Bromir Iron Gulp registered, Master Forge candidate. Lava Beast registered, living heat supplier. Shared authority was not the victory Brumir wanted. It was the victory my supply chain needed. Pride is expensive. Heat contracts are priceless. Kaelith's armor was not fully rebuilt yet, but the spine brace held, the living gear primer bonded, and the workbench stopped flashing critical warnings every time someone breathed near it. That counted as progress. In this place, progress often looked like a woman not dying immediately when the next tree decided to hold a grudge. By the time the forge cooled to merely dangerous, the shop had stopped being a room. Not physically at first. The walls were still obsidian black. The torch still flickered at the center because apparently even dungeon architecture respected tradition, and the heavy iron-bound door still carried more history than hinge. But the traffic pattern had changed. Dwarves came on a schedule. Hive drones entered through side lanes. The demon managed night security. The lava beast had a vent claim under the back wall. Kaelith's armor occupied the forge bench like a royal patient. The basilisk dealer's forfeited wardstones sat in escrow, waiting to be useful or incriminating. The shop could hold it all only if everyone took turns not breathing. Then the system opened the next skill. Unlock condition met. 3 loyal supply factions. Active forge. Legal trade framework. Architectural synthesis. Unlocked. Function. Restructure internal layout using registered materials. I read the unlock twice, then a third time, because promotions down here liked hiding knives in the footnotes. This one carried no bill labeled Destiny. Architectural synthesis was not expansion by number. It was layout with teeth. The interface mapped the void larder as a living diagram. Brewery core. Forge annex. Receiving lane. Guard threshold. Storage cradle. Medical cot. Insultingly marked temporary. Contract counter. Bent seam. Hive relay notch. Dwarven sledge clearance. Every messy adaptation we had hammered into place appeared as a white line, then began suggesting where it should have been all along. I approved the least dramatic configuration because dramatic configurations are how you end up with stairs nobody can use while carrying or the shop moved. Stone folded rather than broke. The single room stretched into connected chambers, each grown out of materials already registered to the shop. The forge sank into its own heat bay behind a low arch, vented through red-black channels lined with deep vein ore. The brewery shifted left, gaining drainage grooves, rack walls, and a proper cooling shelf that made me briefly emotional in a private, dignified way. Storage became a spine of narrow vaults behind the counter. The entrance widened into a receiving hall with chalk lanes turned into permanent grooves. Above it, the turrets settled into recessed nests with clean sight lines and fewer opportunities to shoot a supplier by misunderstanding posture. The original torch stayed in the center chamber, flickering like an old employee who refused retirement. Architectural synthesis complete. Facilities organized. Brewery, obsidian forge, receiving hall, contract counter, deep storage, recovery alcove. Trade throughput, plus 240% projected. Safety shield, online. Evolution shard reserve, 25. 25. The drain had taken 2 shards overnight, but the reserve still looked strong. The words projected throughput were more dangerous. Capacity invites volume. Volume invites attention. Attention invites people who say opportunity when they mean knife. The first one arrived before I finished labeling the vault shelves. She came through the upper route without an escort, which was either confidence or a complete inability to value her own organs. Slender, pale, short white hair cut in a neat bob that looked impossible to maintain this far from soap. Emerald eyes moving over every hinge, lane, turret, and contract mark before they settled on me. Her high-collared black silk dress carried silver embroidery fine enough to be spiderwork, and black lace gloves covered her hands despite the heat bleeding from the forge arch. The turrets marked her amber. The hive did not touch her. Bromir muttered that anyone dressed that clean underground was either rich, cursed, or selling both. She introduced herself as Serial and presented 3 route ledgers, 2 tariff schedules, and a sealed silk token from the upper webs. She did not ask whether I was June Beck. She had already put my name at the top of her proposed contract in flawless hand. That annoyed me. It also saved time. Serial was not a merchant in the crate and cart sense. She was a negotiator, the kind who could make a toll sound like a favor and a threat sound like weather. The route ledgers showed what my new receiving hall had only begun to imply. Goods were moving around us now. Dwarven or down, bread out, tonic concentrates up, heat rights across, hive escorts through. Floor 99 had been a grave on the guild maps. On Serial's ledgers, it was becoming an interchange. She wanted the negotiation desk. Not ownership, not partnership, commission. Clean percentage, contract-bound, payable on deals she closed and routes she kept open. I had expected greed. I got structure. More alarming, I got useful structure. Contract negotiation scanned her proposed terms and found ambition, concealed leverage, and no hostile clauses. That was not innocence. It was professionalism. There is a difference, and only one of them keeps accounts balanced. I rewrote 3 lines anyway. No authority over internal shop law. No private side agreements inside the boundary. Route intelligence filed to the contract counter before commission matured. Serial read the revisions, smiled like she appreciated a knife with a clean edge, and signed. Staff contract registered. Serial, primary negotiator. Trade Hub Protocol, active. Commission framework, for percent of negotiated route value. The title appeared before I had time to object. The Void Larder, Trade Hub recognized. Not level 50, not fortress, not kingdom, a hub, a place goods came because leaving them elsewhere was stupid. I could work with that. Serial went to work immediately, which I respected and resented because it meant my own pace had been too slow. She reorganized the queue outside the receiving hall with 6 hand signals and no raised voice. Dwarves got a fixed delivery window. Hive escorts got outbound tokens marked and sent wax. The lava beast's vent access moved to a heat-safe clause. Bromir's beer tab gained an emergency pause provision that made him suspicious until Serial explained, in careful terms, that dead suppliers collect no ale. He accepted this as hostile wisdom. By nightfall, the hub had rhythm. Or in, bread out, tonic trials scheduled, armor repair staged, sap inventory sealed, turrets tracking green, green, amber, green. For the first time since the gold circle dropped me into the dark, the shop sounded less like survival and more like industry. Then every upper route token turned black. Not dim, black. The silk marks on Serial's ledgers bled color into the page, one by one, until the whole tariff column looked bruised. The hive relay at the northern bend went silent. Dwarven sledges stopped 2 corridors out. A returning drone crawled through the receiving hall dragging webbing across its plates. Thick silver strands hardened around both wings. Serial's smile disappeared. The Spider Queen had sealed the upper routes. No warning petition, no tariff dispute, no courtesy not sent ahead. A full blockade. Web across the trade lanes, venom marks at the bypasses, and a royal signal woven through the silk that translated into one clean commercial fact. Nothing moved without her permission. I looked at the receiving hall, the forge, the brewery, the contract counter, the first real hub I had ever owned. Every lane waited. Every supplier stopped. Every projected number froze. Trade throughput, plus 240% to 0%. Route status, blockaded. Economy flow, halted. The shop had finally become a destination. The road to it had just been strangled shut. The blockade was 3 days old when Serial taught me the difference between a siege and an invoice. Nothing moved on the upper routes. Dwarven sledges idled 2 corridors out, loaded with paid-for ore. Hive escorts came home wearing silver strands around their joints, unhurt, unrobbed, politely turned around. No blood, no bodies, and the reserve ticking down all the while. The Queen's soldiers were not killing anyone. They were sorting everyone. Serial called that the tell. Armies destroy traffic. Landlords catalog it. The Spider Queen did not want my hub dead. She wanted it taxed. I could not go up to argue. The contract held me inside my boundary, and the Queen knew it. So Serial drafted a petition on gray silk. Paper, she said, reads as an insult in the upper webs, and sent it north with a drone that had already been webbed twice and resented it. The answer came down before the next drain tick. Not a letter, a delegation. 3 envoys the size of Brumir descended the north lane, chitin lacquered black over white banding, forelegs raised in the truce posture. Behind them, hanging from the ceiling on a single thread, came a courier spider no bigger than a fist, twitching with the exhaustion of an employee on a 9th consecutive shift. The terms were simple. The Queen considered weeks of untold traffic through her territory a form of theft. She would reopen the routes for a tariff. But first she wanted proof the goods were worth guarding, demonstrated on one of her own. They pushed the little courier forward, feral tear and fraying. Joints worn glossy, spinnerets half dry, written into the ground by wartime message volume. Potential transaction, 1 subject. Feral tier to bonded tier available. Danger class, common courier. Projected payment, 1 evolution shard. 1 shard. A terrible margin on a royal demonstration, but the product on the counter today was not bread. It was precedent. I cut a wedge of pheromone bread, brushed it with tonic concentrate, and set it down at courier height. The runner looked back at its envoys. The envoys did not move, so it ate the way starving professionals eat, embarrassed and thorough. The change took 11 seconds. Legs lengthened and squared. Worn joints replated in black glass. The dry spinnerets flushed, doubled, and settled a new gland under the abdomen. It rose level with the envoy's knees, and the thread it dropped was flat silk ribbon, load-bearing enough to hang a sledge from. Evolution successful, Webrunner courier. Monster tier, feral tier to bonded tier. Payment received, 1 evolution shard. Evolution shard reserve, 25 to 26. The receiving hall had filled while it happened, and what the room did next split 3 ways. The hive tilted forward in one slow, total wave, 10,000 bodies performing reverence toward an insect that had skipped a century of growth between bites. The envoys went the opposite direction, forelegs drawing inward. I have priced enough fear to recognize it under lacquer. And Brumir, professionally offended, muttered that baked goods had no business outperforming a forge. Worship, dread, and envy all pointed at a bakery item. My market had opinions now. The tariff came back within the hour, and it was fair, which surprised everyone except Serial. Fixed toll per sledge. Escort guarantee through web territory. Venom marks cleared from the bypasses. A standing silk allotment at wholesale because the Queen had examined that ribbon. Serial countersigned, logged her commission without being asked, and the tokens on her ledgers bled back from black to silver 1 route at a time. Route status, blockaded to told. Trade throughput, recovering. Evolution shard reserve, 24. The first cargo down the reopened route should have been ore. It was charity. 6 crates on a rented sledge. White lacquer, gold corners, every lid stamped with the Surface Guild's crest under a banner stenciled Goodwill consignment. The turrets marked the sledge amber the moment the crest cleared the bend, which was the most sensible review the Guild had received in years. There was a letter, cream vellum and gold thread, the cipher of Valerius's survey office in the corner. 3 paragraphs of regret about the regrettable hazard classification of Floor 99, 1 paragraph extending partnership to its pioneering commercial community. 6 years in that man's warehouse taught me exactly one thing about guild generosity. It is a delivery method. Nobody ships white lacquer 400 meters down into a grave out of remorse. I ordered the crates quarantined in the receiving lane. Nothing crossed the grooves without appraisal, inventory, and a witness. Brumir found the mead before I finished the sentence. One lit off, one cask tapped with a thumb spike, one tankard rising in a toast to the guild choking on its own ledgers, and then the demon's hand closed over the tankard, and most of a liter of surface mead relocated into Brumir's beard, eyebrows, and left boot. He stood dripping in front of the entire hall. The hive does not laugh, but it can angle itself. The envoy's forelegs performed a small, unmistakable ripple. Somewhere behind me, Kaelith made a sound she would later deny under oath. Brumir announced that he had been conducting quality control, and that surface mead was an insult he intended to document by drinking all of it. The counter panel cut him off. Foreign compound detected, consignment casks, grain, medical stock. Class: evolution suppressant, slow binding. Onset: 20 to 30 days. Effect on monster physiology, tier regression, evolve trait failure. The hall went quiet in the wrong way. I read the panel 3 times, because I wanted to be wrong at least once. The compound was not poison in the honest sense. Honest poison kills the drinker. This unmade the drinker. It would ride weeks of shared meals through a hive, a clan, a floor's worth of customers, then quietly dissolve every evolution my shop had ever sold. Bonded couriers back to feral vermin. Rebuilt claws back to broken ones. The whole economy of Floor 99 regressed to prey on a schedule, aimed at monsters, wrapped in charity. Timed so the collapse would land a month after the guild's banner had gone home clean. I have written enough freight labels to know that a weapons shipment travels best in a gift box. Brumir got the purge draft first, in public, which he minded more than the toxin. He swallowed it with the stiff dignity of a man drinking his own eulogy, informed the room that his ancestors had survived worse breakfasts, and went to stand somewhere his boots could drip in private. Then the system, which had spent the afternoon watching me stare at 6 crates of slow murder, opened a door. Unlock condition met. Hostile compound within registered goods, active brewery, appraisal record. Essence distillation, unlocked. Function: separate a concept from the matter that carries it. The cheat had promised this branch since its first menu. It arrived late, unpaid for, and exactly when the alternative was a funeral. I ran the first distillation in public, in the brewery core, with the envoys and half the hive watching, because the floor needed proof more than I needed privacy. If the guild wanted to poison my customers with charity, my customers were going to watch the charity get gutted on my counter. The apparatus assembled itself from what the shop already owned: the quench basin for cold, a sap line channel for the run, the forge's heart ember for slow, obedient heat. Cask by cask, the consignment went through. The mead came out clean and slightly improved, a fact Brumir declined to discuss. The grain came out inert. The medical stock came out honest. And the suppressant came out of all of it as a single continuous thread of gray, drawn upward through the glass, coiling into a stoppered vial with the patience of a thing that knew how close it had come to working. First distillation, complete. Essence extracted, suppressant concept, 1 vial. Consignment, neutralized, fit for trade. Evolution shard reserve, 22. The hall split again, and this time every reaction pointed one direction. The hive pressed low. The envoys pressed lower. Brumir studied the vial the way he studied deep vein ore. My shop had just pulled a massacre out of a mead cask by boiling it politely, and every faction present understood the new arithmetic. The guild's cleverest weapon was now my shelf stock. The vial was also evidence. Essence keeps the fingerprints of its maker, and this one carried a formulation cipher the system rendered without being asked. Batch codes. A lab registry. A requisition line drawn against a surface military schedule, filed through Valerius's budget column. Not a rogue alchemist. A funded, approved, documented field test, shipped under a goodwill banner to learn whether the depths would drink first and audit later. Proof of malice, complete with a lot number. I cataloged everything, letter, manifest, lids, vial, into escrow beside the basilisk dealer's forfeited stones, because down here evidence was inventory. It was late when I noticed Serial had stayed behind. She had translated guild customs marks all day without a reference, and had read the requisition cipher upside down faster than the system rendered it. I had filed that under professional history, because she had never once lied on a contract inside my boundary. The skill would have caught it. Which meant whatever she was about to do was not going to be a lie either. The manifest still lay on the counter. Fourth line from the bottom. In the small print, the guild reserves for the clauses that matter. Consignment of this schedule requires counter seal of the receiving agent in place. In place. On floor 99. Recruited, embedded, and trusted before the crates ever shipped. Serial peeled off her left glove one finger at a time, produced a slender silver seal I had never seen her wear, and pressed it into the manifest wax. It matched the requisition cipher stroke for stroke. The cipher was Valerius's. The seal was hers. She looked up with the same professional calm she had worn while negotiating a queen, and said she believed it was time we discussed her previous employer. The guild's poison had shipped with a delivery confirmation. My head negotiator had just signed it. The morning after the seal came off her glove, Serial handed me her former employer page by page, in order, with the margins explained. 8 months ago, Valerius's survey office recruited her for a posting nobody wanted, embedded receiving agent for a consignment schedule that did not exist yet. Standard doctrine for depth operations, she said. Place the clerk before the cargo. She took it because the posting doubled her pay and halved her supervision, then discovered on arrival that the deepest floor on the maps ran the only honest ledger she had ever audited. She stopped filing reports that mattered. She did not stop filing reports. An agent who goes quiet gets replaced by an agent you have not met. The counter seal was the last live clause of her old contract. Refusing it would have flagged her file, and flagged files get visitors. Which meant the guild now believed floor 99 would begin quietly dying in 20 to 30 days. I sat with that for a while. Being angry at her bought nothing. What the guild believed, on the other hand, was worth money. Valerius thought my customers were regressing on a schedule, and a creditor who thinks you are already ruined stops watching your accounts. So I amended her contract at the counter, in the open, the skill confirming every clause as it went down. Employment, exclusive. Her channel to the survey office, kept open on purpose. Every report traveling up it, drafted at my counter and signed in her hand, saying exactly what I wanted the surface to know. The first one reported that the floor was drinking heavily. Strictly true. That was the craft of it. Contract amended, Serial, primary negotiator. Outbound correspondence, routed through contract counter. Evolution shard reserve, 22 to 20. That was the first day. By the second morning, the told routes had found their rhythm, and the rhythm brought strangers. Orc warbands came down out of the dry western galleries, gray-green and basalt-scarred, hauling salvage iron they wanted turned into edges. Goblin tunnel clans came up from the flooded east, small, quick, smelling of lamp smoke, wanting rope, bread, waterproof wax, and credit. Both populations had spent generations raiding each other across the middle galleries. Both walked into my receiving hall inside the same week and pretended the other one was furniture. Then both of them found the Apex Ale. The ale was my own doing. Mythic Brewing had been demanding a masterwork since the distillation, so I built one. World tree sap triple fermented over the forge's hard ember, aged in casks cut from deep vein ore. 1 keg a week. That was not scarcity theater. That was the honest sealing of the sap allotment, the ember's patience, and my hands. It poured dark gold, drank warm, and left a day of borrowed strength and a much longer loyalty behind it. Underneath the ale, the ordinary ledger ran an ordinary, healthy week. A dwarven blast porter jumped a tier for 3 shards. 6 gravel runners went bonded at 1 apiece for courier work on the new routes. The drain took its 2 a day and was outrun, which is the whole business, most weeks. Weekly settlement, +9 earned, 6 drained. Evolution shard reserve, 23. The first keg sold out in an hour. The second started a war. It began as a tapline brawl on quota day, orc shield hand against goblin sapper, 3 teeth on my clean floor. Serial logged it as a customer dispute. Wrong ledger. 2 days later, the western approach wore fresh orc claim marks, painted at goblin head height as an insult. The night after, a goblin crew collapsed a bypass tunnel with 2 orc porters in it. The porters dug out angry. Their war band came down the lane carrying war hooks, and the drums started in the flooded east within the hour, and the middle galleries emptied of every neutral thing that could walk. The counter panel put the cost in one line. Trade throughput, -38%. Route casualties, 2 wounded, escorts withdrawn. Dead customers pay nothing. Fighting customers pay worse than nothing. They spend their wages on weapons, wreck the corridors goods travel through, and then ask for credit to keep doing it. Every account on my books was downstream of a corridor one of these factions was preparing to burn. Kaelith offered to end the war in an afternoon, and the demon volunteered for the night half. I refused both, not out of tenderness. A peace enforced by my guards would hold exactly as long as my guards stood in the corridor, and I could not garrison every gallery between here and the flooded east while also running a counter. I had a cheaper lever. I stopped pouring. Not rationed. Stopped. The tap went dry for orc and goblin alike. The standing orders voided. The week's keg sealed in deep storage with a turret watching it. Word went out through the hive relays and plain trade can't. The void larder does not sell strength to people who use it on my routes. When the war ends, the tap opens. Not before. An embargo only works if the seller can outlast the buyer's pride, and outlasting is not free. 4 days of frozen trade meant 4 days of the shield's upkeep with nothing coming in. 8 shards gone from the reserve while I stood at a dry tap on principle. I had budgeted a week of margin against their stubbornness. It took 4 days. Evolution shard reserve, 15. The war speaker for the orcs arrived first, which cost the orcs standing, a fact the goblin tunnel matriarch noted by arriving second with twice the escort. They stood in my receiving hall at opposite ends of the chalk grooves, close enough to trade, far enough to charge, and I learned the actual shape of the grievance. It was not territory. It was not the dead porters, who were both drinking soup in my recovery alcove. It was that each side believed the other was getting a bigger allotment of the ale, and neither could prove it, because neither could read the other's tally marks. The fix, in other words, was paperwork. I had been keeping faction accounts in my own head and on Serial's silk. The system, apparently, had been watching me do it the hard way. Unlock condition met. 3 loyal factions, standing tariff treaty, contested allotment. Faction management, unlocked. Function, registered faction ledgers, loyalty, quotas, standing orders, breach flags. The interface put every registered faction on one board above the counter, loyalty and quota and outstanding balance. In glyphs the system rendered for each reader in their own marks. The hive sat at 94 loyalty. The dwarves sat at 88. A number Bromir called slander, and the beer tab called generous. The orcs came aboard at 61. The goblins at 58, mostly from resentment about the escort. For the first time since the gold circle dropped me down here, both sides of a feud could read the same page and find the same numbers. A surprising fraction of the war evaporated on the spot. The treaty took one evening, and Serial drafted it in 3 scripts. A joint tap hall on neutral ground in the receiving annex, orc benches and goblin benches, and a shared floor drain, because optimism has limits. The weekly keg split by trade tonnage, not by headcount and not by history. Move more freight, earn more ale. Breach flags automatic and public. Raid a route, collapse a tunnel, paint one more insult at anyone's head height, and the offender's quota moves to the other bench for a month with the whole board watching. Peace, priced into supply. Nobody had to trust anybody. They only had to want the ale more than the war, and I had spent a dry week proving exactly how much that was. They signed at the counter. Then they paid the way this floor pays. The war speaker took the pledge draft in a glass tankard of neon blue and came up off one knee a head taller, tusks sheathed in black glass, the basalt scars closed to seams. The tunnel matriarch drank sitting down and stood up wrong, joints rebuilt for open ground, eyes gone lamp-bright, 6 of her escort flinching before pride caught them. Evolution successful, orc war speaker. Evolution successful, goblin tunnel matriarch. Monster tier, feral tier to bonded tier, both subjects. Payment received, 3 plus 3 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 15 to 21. The hall reaction split along faction lines, which by then I could literally watch on the board. Orc loyalty jumped 9 points. Goblin loyalty jumped 11. Hive loyalty ticked up 2 for no reason I could bill, unless insects appreciate arbitration. Throughput, recovering 96% of rated capacity. Bromir surveyed the tap hall, the faction board, the 2 newly bonded chiefs failing to glare at each other across a shared drain, and announced that I was no longer running a shop. I was running an underkingdom. I corrected him. It was a shop. The shop simply had a foreign policy now, and the foreign policy had a tap schedule. I should have written the tap schedule tighter. The treaty split the keg by tonnage. It said nothing about who poured first. On the first night of the joint hall, the ceremonial keg came up from deep storage with both benches watching, and the war speaker reached for the tap, because strength drinks first in the galleries, and the matriarch's hand was already on the spigot, because in the tunnels the eldest pours. Neither hand moved. The hall went quiet in the old way, the pre-invoice way. By the time the runner reached me, the benches had emptied onto their feet, war hooks were out over 1 keg of ale, and 2 brand new breach flags were burning red on my beautiful new board. Faction status, orcs, breach pending. Faction status, goblins, breach pending. 3 days of peace. 1 keg. Both factions at each other's throats over the first pour, and the only thing standing between my treaty and my floor drain was which hand came off that tap first. I picked up the tap key and went to work. I settled the first pour with the oldest rule in retail. The house drinks first. I walked into the tap hall, put the key in the spigot with 40 war hooks watching, and drew 1 tankard for the shop itself. Not for me. For the counter. I set it on the faction board shelf as the house is cut, declared that every keg opens with the vendor's draw for quality assurance, and that after the house, the benches alternate by week, tonnage settling any tie. Nobody's custom lost. Nobody poured second to an enemy. Both chiefs got to tell their people they had yielded to the merchant, which is not yielding at all in either of their traditions, and the breach flags came down to amber before the foam settled. Faction status, orcs, warning logged. Faction status, goblins, warning logged. Evolution shard reserve, 17. The treaty had survived its first tap night. I filed the tankard rule as a permanent clause and slept the sleep of a man whose wars were all administrative. Then the cold came up the east lanes, and I learned my climate was also inventory. It arrived as a customer complaint. A goblin runner reported the flooded galleries growing a skin of ice, which the flooded galleries had never done in tunnel memory. The next morning, the hive's outbound couriers moved at half speed, joints stiff, scent wax cracking off the tokens. By the third day, frost climbed my own doorframe on the inside, and the receiving hall's breath hung white in the lanes. The shop began failing in order of temperature. The brewery quit first, fermentation dead in the vats, the sap gone to amber glass. Pheromone bread came out of the ovens fine and froze rock solid on the racks before the escorts could load it. The hive slowed until sentences took a full minute of antenna work. The dwarves declared the weather refreshing and kept hauling, which would have been more useful if their customers had not been going dormant around them. A blockade stops trade. This congealed it. Trade throughput, minus 44% and falling. Brewery, offline, ferment temperature below viable. Evolution shard reserve, 13. Cold is a supply problem. Warmth was the one good every account on my books suddenly wanted, and I had exactly one reliable source of it, and that source had opinions. Brumir's proposal was fire brewing, the dwarven answer to most things. Brew heat into a tonic, pour it down every throat on the floor, repeat forever. I refused before he finished. Heating bodies one tankard at a time is a consumable solution to an infrastructure problem, a subscription nobody down here could afford, me least of all, and the first cold snap that outlasted my sap allotment would kill every customer who had gotten dependent on it. You do not solve a climate out of a cask. You solve it at the center of the floor plan. The design was the eternal hearth. A vessel, not a fire. A shell of deep vein or to hold heat. Work that deep veins had been doing since before anyone mined them. A lens of slag glass, ground from the blade the lava beast forged in the duel, to spread warmth level instead of letting it pool at the ceiling. And at the core, an ember seed shed from a living heat, sustained by the shop's own registered structure so that it would burn as long as the shop stood, fuel-free, flame-free, forever. The only living heat on floor 99 was the lava beast. That negotiation went about the way winter negotiations go. The beast had spent days as the sole supplier of warmth and had noticed. Its vent claim had become a pilgrimage site. Hive drones and goblin runners pressed in rings around the forge bay, and it had begun conducting itself less as an employee and more as a small weather god. When I explained that I intended to build a second heat, a permanent one, in the center chamber, its bay ran 20 degrees hotter for an hour. It saw a rival. Worse, a rival that would never sleep, never molt, and never demand ale. It sealed the forge with its own body and sulked at a temperature that warped the tool racks. Serial drafted the settlement. One shed ember seed, freely given, in exchange for a permanent title on the faction board, Keeper of the Greater Flame, and a clause naming the hearth a subordinate fire under the beast's nominal authority. The beast surrendered the ember seed grudgingly, conceding nothing but the seed itself, and made it clear a rematch over forge primacy would be demanded at a date of its choosing. It has not signed the final clause to this day. It keeps the draft under its vent stone and takes it out to glare at. While the forge sulked, the floor got its comedy. The goblin sappers, watching Brumir declare for the fourth time that dwarves do not feel cold, dared him to prove it on the frost-rimed anvil. Brumir, for Alesh into his tab, pressed his tongue to the iron. The anvil won. It took a warm tankard poured over his face in front of both benches, the hive, two chiefs, and the faction board to free him, and the board, which renders everything for every reader, helpfully displayed the event in 3 scripts. The orcs pounded the benches. The goblins invented a song on the spot. Brumir spent the evening insisting through a swollen tongue that he had been testing the anvil, and his loyalty score did not drop a single point, because down here being laughed at warm is worth more than being respected frozen. The build took one long night at the cold forge. Bromir shaped the or shell with his tongue, still lisping. I ground the lens and set the seed, and sovereign smithing took the assembly the moment my hand stopped, recognizing gear meant to grow with its owner, except the owner it bonded to was the shop. Sovereign smithing. Masterwork registered, the eternal hearth. Facility integration cost, 5 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 9 to 4. The freeze had already dragged the reserve to 9, the first single digit since my first week on this floor, and the integration wanted 5 of them. I paid 5 of my last 9 shards for a fireplace, with the drain still ticking and the trade lanes frozen. It was still the easiest purchasing decision of the quarter. Infrastructure pays you back on schedule. Nothing else down here does. We set the hearth in the center chamber, under the old torch, which kept its post above the new vessel and flickered on, unbothered, senior staff to the end. The lens took the ember seed's heat and laid it out flat and even, wall to wall, a warmth with no bright to it, no smoke, no flame to feed. The eternal hearth, installed. Facility, temperature control, active. Interior climate, locked, all chambers. The brewery came back in an hour. The bread stayed soft on the racks. The hive's couriers woke up mid-thought and finished sentences they had started that morning. 5 goblin tunnel runners bought cold hardening evolutions for the outer routes at a shard apiece, feral to bonded, quick work at the counter, and the reserve crawled back from the edge. Evolutions, 5 subjects, cold-hardened tunnel runners. Payment received, 5 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 4 to 9. Kaelith took the late watch by the hearth that night, and I stayed at the counter longer than the ledger needed me to. Her armor's living gear had run slow all week, the plates sluggish in the cold, and she had stood every one of those watches anyway, without saying a word about it. She said the deep cold felt familiar. Her first years under the contract, before the shop, before any of us, had felt exactly this way, stopped and silent, and waiting for warmth that was not scheduled to come. She held her palms over the lens a long moment. Then she said the shop was the first place the cold had ever ended, and went back to her post before I could decide what to do with that. I wrote it in no ledger. Some accounts you keep somewhere else. Outside, the frost on the lanes began to sweat and slick. Environmental mastery, the system called the whole affair. The floor had a climate now, and the climate was mine, set from the center chamber, adjustable to the degree. I had assumed the cold was weather. Weather does not follow the warmth home. It came up the north lane an hour before the toll gate opened, filling the corridor wall to wall, a pale mass of plated frost with a head longer than my receiving hall and eyes the flat white of old ice. The ice WIRM did not roar and did not charge. It flowed around the shop's boundary the way meltwater flows around a stone, coiled twice, laid its head against the outer wall beside my door, and breathed out. The frost stopped sweating. The smoke above the old torch stopped rising. Through the doorway, I watched a hive courier hang in the air between one wing beat and the next, and the toll gate's chain hold slack in mid-swing, and the whole bright noise of my floor go silent. Not the quiet of fear this time, but the quiet of a stopped clock. Exterior temporal differential, detected. The void larder, enclosed stasis bubble. Safety shield, resisting intrusion, upkeep, drain accelerated. Evolution shard reserve, 9, draining. Inside the bubble, one thing still moved on its own schedule, and it was me. The WRM's white eye settled against the window, patient, enormous, waiting for service. Time was stopped in every direction, my staff hung mid-step around me, and the only currency keeping me outside that stillness was bleeding out of a 9-shard reserve at a rate the panel declined to specify. The shop was open. Apparently, so was I. The ice WIRM was not attacking my shop. It was starving next to it. I worked that out standing in the stopped world outside my own door, the only moving thing on the floor, reading the WRM the same way I read any account that walks in oversized and silent. The frost plates hung loose over its ribs. The white eyes tracked warmth and nothing else. The stasis was not a weapon aimed at me. It was the last trick of a creature a century past its last real meal, freezing time around its own body so the body would stop spinning what was left of it. It had followed my new warmth home and wrapped itself around the one lit stove in a frozen world, and the enclosure of my shop was incidental. The whole floor just happened to be standing in its blanket. Starvation is not a threat. Starvation is a customer profile. I opened the annex door into the cold side of the boundary and laid out the largest single meal my kitchen has ever produced, tonic lace stock in a quenching vat, 3 days of bread, and a full tankard of neon blue set on top. House rules, the vendor's draw already taken. Then I stood beside it where the WRMs I could price the whole arrangement, and waited, while the accelerated drain chewed my reserve and the panel counted it without comment. Evolution Shard Reserve, 9-6. The WRM unwound one coil. Time crept back into the lane in patches, frost resuming its slow sweat, the toll chain finishing a swing it had started the day before. It ate for an hour. The stasis let go entirely somewhere around the second bite, and my floor came back to life mid-step, 100 conversations finishing sentences begun yesterday. The evolution, when it came, moved more mass than the hall had ever seen jump at once. Plates re-knit tight over the ribs. The long head squared. The old ice eyes cleared to something that could see a thing besides heat, and the system priced the transaction at the top of its own schedule. Evolution successful, Ice WRM. Monster tier, Feral tier to Bonded tier. Danger class, Boss unique, payment 10 times. Payment received, 10 Evolution Shards. Evolution Shard Reserve, 6-16. It took a berth against the north boundary, coiled around the cold larder wall where its chill was suddenly an asset, and went pleasantly half asleep. My climate crisis was now employee housing. The floor walked wide around it for a day and then started using it as a landmark. 6 days passed the way good weeks pass, in tonnage. The routes ran warm under the Hearth's climate. The tap hall alternated benches without bloodshed. The ordinary counter did its ordinary work, 1 notable evolution and 5 vermin class, and the drain took its daily 2 and stayed outrun. Weekly settlement, +8 earned, 12 drained. Evolution Shard Reserve, 12. Upstairs, meanwhile, my shop was dying on schedule. Serial's reports had spent 3 weeks describing exactly the floor Valerius expected: traffic sluggish, monsters dormant, the hazard zone winding down, downturn consistent with projections. We had timed the fiction to his own poison. His suppressant was due to take hold between day 20 and day 30. This was day 22, and somewhere above us, a man who believed his weapon had worked would want it confirmed and collected. The Hive's high sentries gave us the arrival of full gallery early. For humans on the toll road, moving in a diamond, hazard assessment banner up front, and none of the walk of surveyors underneath it. Serial read their license plates off a sentry's sketch. An A-rank party, guild certified, combat licensed, the kind of asset a survey office does not spend on a dead floor. They had come to confirm a graveyard and requisition its secret. The orders found on them later said it plainly: verify regression, locate the source of the anomalous evolutions, secure it, retrieve the clerk if the clerk is extant. Retrieve. 6th item on the list. The floor wanted to meet them in the galleries. The war speaker offered 40 hooks. Kaelith stood at the door and did not offer, the offer being her default state. I turned the floor down flat, every faction, and put it on the board in 3 scripts, because the point of the next hour was not to win a fight. Any floor can win a fight. The point was to demonstrate, in front of every account I held, that this shop does not spend its customers to protect its stock. The defenses I had built with their own materials would carry it, or none of my architecture meant anything. Everyone got the same standing order. Stand where the intruders can see you. Be visibly, insultingly awake. Touch nothing. The A-rank party came down my receiving lane at noon expecting dormancy, and walked into an economy, standing at parade rest. Orc benches on the left, silent. Goblin lamps on the right, lit. The hive banked in tiers up the walls, 10,000 sets of folded wings, awake. The demon at the night arch in broad daylight. And dead ahead at the end of the chalk grooves, one clerk at a counter, the easy retrieval, 6th item on their list, wiping a tankard. To their credit, they read the room instantly. To their doctrine's credit, they went for the counter anyway. The shop handled it. The grooves their vanguard crossed folded up around their boots, permanent architecture doing exactly what it had been grown to do. The walls of the receiving hall rotated 3 degrees on the synthesis plan and turned their straight charge into a spiral that arrived nowhere. The guest lane's climate dropped 40 degrees in 4 steps. Hearth control run in reverse, and their caster's hands went too stiff to finish a syllable. The turrets marked all 4 and fired restraint netting, not one lethal round, because corpses are a diplomatic incident and prisoners are leverage. And the basilisk dealers forfeited wardstones, sitting in escrow all these months, drank the party's shield spells down to the dregs the moment they flared. It lasted under 2 minutes. I never left the counter. Nobody on my floor lifted a hook, a claw, or a wing, and the system, which had watched every siege in this dungeon's history from the inside, wrote the outcome in the driest voice available. Engagement concluded, A-rank party neutralized. Method, registered shop defenses only. Staff and faction casualties, 0. First combat victory, recorded. In the silence afterward, with 4 of the surface's finest trust in restraint netting in my quarantine lane, the floor did the thing I had specifically not scheduled. The war speaker started it, one fist against the orc benches, slow. The goblin lamp swung with it. The hive took the rhythm through the walls until the architecture hummed. The dwarves came up from the sledge bays hammering time on their own iron boots. The demon added something subsonic from the arch, and the WYRM, half asleep against the north wall, put a tone under all of it that I felt in my molars. The faction board translated the noise into every script it carried, and then, apparently satisfied, into one line of mine. Faction consensus reached, sovereign. Declared by all registered factions of floor 99. Sovereign of the floor. Declared by acclamation, over my objection, by monsters applauding a man for standing still behind a counter. I filed it, in the moment, as a loyalty phenomenon with excellent retention numbers, because filing it was easier than feeling it, and I did not yet know how little time I had for either. The captured captain talked before dinner, mostly from professional disgust. They were not the strike team. They were the survey ahead of it, and their orders had one more line I had not gotten to, the line that said their check-in silence would be read as floor secured. No report was ever going upstairs. Their message stones sat in my escrow next to the ward stones and the suppressant vial. Which meant that right now, in Valerius's ledger, for A-rank assets had gone quiet on a dead floor, and to a man who believed his poison had worked, quiet meant done, and done meant proceed. I was still holding that thought when the north shaft coughed. Dust came down through the toll gate first, then the sound, blasting charges a half-mile up, methodical, professional, on schedule. The hive sentry's relay lit the board in one cascade. Ropes in the shaft, 40+ descending, Guild Elite insignia, Valerius's own colors on the lead banner. The strike team had not waited for a report. The silence was the report. They were coming down believing the floor was a graveyard, and its clerk was a retrieval, and every rope in the shaft was carrying another armed opinion about my easy little shop. Route status, north shaft, breached. Evolution Shard Reserve, 10. I put the tankard down and told the board to wake everyone. 41 of Valerius's elites came down the north shaft ropes into a floor that had been awake for an hour, and the floor did not wait for them to reach the bottom. I watched it from the counter, on the board, in relayed sentry script, which is the only way a shopkeeper should ever watch a war. The WYRM took the shaft base first, not with violence, but with temperature, and the climbing lines went brittle and the climbing hands went clumsy 40 meters above the stone. The hive unhooded every lamp in the north galleries at once, then killed them all, then lit them somewhere else, until the strike team's formation was a memory arguing with a map. The goblins collapsed exactly 2 tunnels, hurting, not burying. The orcs stood across the one corridor left open and let themselves be seen by torchlight, 40 hooks at parade rest, bonded, enormous, patient. And at the base of the ropes, where the survey maps promised a dead grave and a retrievable clerk, Kaelith stood alone in the cold with her violet eyes reflecting the lamplight, and asked the vanguard, once, politely, whether they had an appointment. They broke before breakfast. Not beaten, in the military sense. Refused. The floor declined the invasion the way a fortress declines weather, and the weather went back up the ropes in pieces of formation, leaving behind 11 rope rigs, a supply cache, 2 banners in Valerius's colors, and no coherent idea of what it had seen. The hive sentries tracked the survivors 9 floors up, still climbing, still not stopping to compare stories. Whatever report survived that climb would be a fever dream of moving walls and white eyes and cold that ate spell work, a death trap, a hazard, an act of the deep. Not an economy. My ledger stayed a secret their own terror would keep for me. Engagement. North shaft, repelled. Faction casualties. 6 wounded, 0 lost. Evolution Shard Reserve, 6. Serial wrote the surface's version of the night before the wounded were done being bandaged. Assets lost to feral surge activity. Floor conditions catastrophic and worsening. Recommend depth, 99 corridor be written off entirely. All of it in her old employer's own preferred format. Every line pointed away from the truth, and the last line pointed at the invoice for her back pay, because craft deserves signature. The reply that came down 2 days later carried Valerius's cipher and 1 sentence of budget approval for a full reassessment next quarter. He had lost an A-rank party, 40 elites worth of equipment, and a poisoning, and his answer was a calendar entry. The rivalry was not over. It had simply been rescheduled, and I filed the cipher next to all the other evidence and let it wait its turn. The captured captain watched the whole aftermath from the quarantine lane, and on the second morning asked to speak to me. Guild doctrine, it turned out, had exactly 1 framework for a licensed human found alive among monsters, and the captain applied it with real sincerity. Hostage. Extraction available. Cooperation with my captors fully understandable. No charges contemplated. A discreet retrieval to the surface. Reinstatement. Back wages. My old life returned with interest for my ordeal. My old life. I stood at my counter and made an honest inventory of it, because I am incapable of doing anything else with an offer. A warehouse that had fired me for brewing on my lunch breaks. A manager who had signed a poison shipment with a goodwill banner on it. A city where my name had never once been at the top of a page. Against that, a floor where the bread rose on schedule, the tap hall alternated benches without bloodshed, 10,000 employees knew my footsteps, and the doorframe held a WRM-shaped landmark that customers used for directions. There was nothing in the surface column, not homesickness rounded down, nothing. I told the captain the shop appreciated the offer and had no retrieval to schedule, that the clerk they had been sent for did not exist anymore, and that lunch would be along shortly. It was the first time I had said it out loud where the system could hear it. The clerk did not exist anymore. Somebody else was standing in his boots, and had been for a while, and every faction on this floor had seen it before I had. The counter panel took my statement as testimony. Milestone recorded, clerk to king. Shopkeeper rank, E to D. Safety shield upkeep, 2 to 4 shards per day. Skill unlocked, core resonance. The rank came with a bill, because every promotion down here hides a knife in the footnotes, and this one did not even hide it. Double upkeep, effective immediately, the price of being a bigger thing in the dungeon's eyes. Core resonance came with no bill at all, which worried me more, and did nothing when I prodded it except settle into the counter under my palms as a faint, patient rhythm, far below the stone, ancient and regular. The dungeon had a pulse. Apparently kings get to feel it. The demon came to the counter that evening, first employee, Night Arch veteran, and made the first request of the new reign. Not ale, not wages. It wanted to be made worthy of standing guard for a king, and it set its accumulated pay on the counter to buy the making. I brewed for it myself, no apprentice hands. The evolution that took it was nothing at all resembling the little jumps my counter sells by the dozen. The Night Arch's shadows bent toward it. The bonded frame opened into something taller, cleaner, horned and polished black, and the tier that had capped every transaction since my first week cracked open one step further with a sound the whole hall heard in their teeth. Evolution successful, greater demon. Monster tier, bonded tier to ascended tier, first ascension. Payment received, 3 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 6 to 9. The hive requested the war feed the next day, 100 door guard soldiers, wholesale rate, and the shared trough ran neon blue for an hour while 100 sets of plates went glossy and dense. Ascension for the guard cast, at bulk pricing, on faction credit, cleared same day. Mass evolution, 100 subjects, wholesale rate. Payment received, 10 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 9 to 19. Commerce found its level around the new reign within decent speed, and the prices wrote themselves onto the board in 3 scripts. A vermin class jump held at 1 shard. Notable work at 3. The Queen's sledge toll stayed fixed at her treaty rate, 1 part in 10 of cargo value, and her envoy sent formal congratulations woven in ribbon silk, addressed, for the first time, to a title instead of a name. The Apex Ale allotment went to a posted schedule, half a keg a bench per week, tonnage ties broken by the house. The Lava Beast, informed that royal patronage now technically flowed through me, took the Hearth settlement draft out from under its vent stone, glared at it with fresh commitment, and did not sign it. The rematch over Forge Primacy now upgraded, in its own accounting, to a matter of state. Twice that week, the floor shivered. Small motions, a ripple in the tankards, dust off the old torches bracket, gone before anyone could point at them. Brumir blamed the shaft charges settling. The dwarves know stone, so I let the explanation stand, and noted privately that the rhythm under my palms had hitched both times, the deep pulse stumbling half a beat and catching itself, an old heart on a hard stare. I did not stand in the center chamber that night mourning a city that had thrown me away. I want that on the record. What I did was stand by the eternal hearth with the drain running at 4 a day and a 19-turn 7-shard reserve, doing King's arithmetic, which is clerk's arithmetic with more lives in the margin column, while Kaelith held the late watch beside me, and the W-rims breathing kept the north wall cold, and my whole absurd, thriving, impossible underkingdom slept on top of a heartbeat only I could feel. Evolution shard reserve, 7. The pulse stumbled again. It did not catch itself. The floor did not shiver this time. It heaved. The stone under the shop rolled once, wall to wall, a motion no blasting charge has ever made. The tap hall's kegs jumped their cradles. The hive went silent in one vast intake, and every panel the system owned lit at the same instant with the same line. Void Quake, first recorded event. Origin below. Core resonance correlation, your signature. The dungeon has noticed you. Far under my boots, the old heart was beating wrong, and it was beating in my rhythm. The king had a customer he had never invoiced, and it was the floor itself. The floor stopped moving before my inventory did. For a full minute after the void quake let go, the shop kept counting its own damage out loud. Kegs rocked back into their cradles. Tankards rang on the racks. A shelf of tonics settled one clink at a time, and the old torch in the center of the void larder swayed on its bracket without going out. It has never gone out. I no longer call that luck. Then the panels finished their own settling, and the real arithmetic arrived. Structural integrity, 81%. Evolution shard reserve, 3. Dawn had taken the shield's 4 shards while the dust was still airborne. 3 left meant 1 more dawn, and after that the safety shield that made every treaty on this floor enforceable would blink out over a cracked kingdom with the dungeon's own heart misfiring under it. I wrote the number on the counter slate, so I would stop hoping it was different. The damage report came in by faction, because everything on this floor comes in by faction now. 16 kegs cracked, for beyond saving. Bread ovens intact, proofing shelf ruined. 2 days of pheromone bread batches lost. 3 goblin tunnels slumped. 1 high vault wall split floor to ceiling, and the north galleries shed stone dust every time anything heavier than a drone crossed them. The eternal hearth had not so much as flickered, or shell, slag glass lens, ember seed, all sound. 0 dead, 9 injured, 1 dwarf furious. Bromir had been mid-pour when the floor heaved, and the tap hall would be hearing about the lost mead until some new crisis replaced it. Under all of it, through my palms on the counter, core resonance went on reporting the only fact that mattered. The pulse was still wrong. Deep, slow, patient, and hitching every few beats in a rhythm I recognized, because the rhythm was mine. A king whose own heartbeat shakes the kingdom does not fix that by apologizing. He fixes the kingdom's footing first. The factions did not wait to be invoiced. Within the hour, the tunnel matriarch stood at my counter with her 2 best sappers and a sack of shards, saved from the treaty months. Her shoring crews needed to be stronger than the stone they braced, today, not after a season of natural growth. 2 notable evolutions, 3 shards each. The sappers drank standing up, jumped a tier while the tankards were still wet, and left with their new shoulders barely clearing the doorframe. The hive came next, wholesale. 60 diggers for the split vault wall, 1/10 of a shard a subject at the trough rate. The neon blue ran for half an hour, and 60 sets of forelimbs came out the other side rated for load-bearing work. Payments received, 12 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 15. 15. Breathing room. If a heartbeat away from the next quake counts as room. By the second morning I had stopped patching and started planning, because patching was losing. The cracks were not the problem. The problem was that my building stood on a heartbeat with a stutter, and no amount of mortar negotiates with that. Core resonance could hear the stutter. Architectural synthesis could act on what I heard. The 2 skills had never been asked to share paperwork before, and the counter panel took a long moment on the request, the way any clerk does when 2 departments suddenly need each other. The survey took the whole day. I stood with both palms flat on the counter and listened down through the strata. The pulse hitched. Around the hitch were bands where the stumble ground straight through the rock, and deeper, offset from the old load lines, quiet points where the beat ran smooth no matter how badly it tripped upstream. Bedrock the wrongness passed around instead of through. I marked 11 of them on the slate, and synthesis quoted me the job. Sink the shop's roots past the fractured shelf and rehang the entire structure on the quiet points. 5 shards, payable on completion. No refunds from geology. Meanwhile, the drain went on being the drain. The second dawn took its 4. 11 left. I paid the 5. The rebuild was almost insultingly quiet. No grinding, no theater. The walls breathed once. The floor under my boots went from a surface I stood on to a structure that held me, a difference no customer would ever see, and every rune in the building registered instantly. Stone flowed down and outward in taproots I could feel rather than watch, found the 11 quiet points, and gripped. Architectural synthesis, foundation attunement complete. Evolution shard reserve, 6. The Orc War Speaker had watched the whole procedure from the tap hall with the unhurried attention orcs reserve for load-bearing decisions. He put 3 shards on the counter before the panel finished glowing and asked for the same treatment for his clan's bridge carrier, the hook-bearer who holds the pontoon spans when the low tunnels flood. Notable class, 1 jump. If the floor meant to keep bucking, the clans meant to stand on things that held. 9 in the reserve. The third dawn took its 4. 5. The aftershock arrived that afternoon. The pulse hitched, missed, and slammed the beat home late, and the whole floor jumped. Hive galleries rattling, sledge road bells ringing down the far routes, dust coming off every bracket in the north. In the shop, the tankards did not even touch their neighbors. The structure rolled with the mist and settled back onto its 11 roots, and the loudest sound in the tap hall was Broomer failing to spill anything and looking personally cheated about it. Word travels at the speed of trade down here. Before closing, one of the Queen's Road envoys had bought a notable jump for the lead sledge hauler on the damaged switchback. Cargo does not apologize for terrain, her ribbon note observed. It reroutes, and the day closed at 8 shards, drain standing, kingdom standing, ledger honest. Evolution shard reserve, 8. That night, after Kaelith took the late watch, I stayed at the counter with my palms down, doing what apparently passes for statecraft now, listening. The new roots carried the pulse up clean, and for the first time since the quake I could hear the shape of the wrongness instead of only the fact of it. The stumble was not decay. It was not damage. It was effort. Something far below was trying to match a rhythm it had only recently learned, and it kept reaching for the beat a half step early, the way a beginner reaches, and missing. Then, in the middle of the miss, the pulse knocked. 3 beats, evenly spaced, deliberate, nothing geological about them. Through 11 taproots and a counter I had just rehung on the heart of the world, something tapped out a pattern and waited for a reply. The counter panel lit in the unhurried script it saves for the oldest authority it knows. Notice from floor 100. An envoy ascends. The boss requests an appointment. Downstairs was coming upstairs, and it had asked for a slot on the calendar. You do not book appointments with a corpse, a clerk, or a grave. You book them with a government. The envoy from floor 100 arrived at the exact hour it had booked, and that frightened me more than the quake had. Punctuality is a language. Whatever kept the deepest floor of the world had just told me, in my own dialect, that it kept books too. It came up through the stone without disturbing a single tankard, riding the pulse the way freight rides a lift, and stepped out of the floor in front of my counter, already bowing. A herald, not a monster. Tall, narrow, built of layered black stone with seams of pure absence where mortar should have been, wearing formality so old it had worn grooves in the creature's own posture. The torch did not flicker. The torch, I noted, did not dare. The hall had assembled whether I wanted ceremony or not, and the assembly split 3 ways down old lines. The orcs stood at parade rest along the east wall, 40 hooks grounded, honoring rank the only way orcs honor anything. The goblins had evaporated into the seams and become 40 pairs of eyes in the dark, terror conducted with excellent sight lines. And the hive had arranged itself across the floor in slow concentric rings, a living mandala pointed at the visitor, which from the hive is not fear and not respect, but something adjacent to prayer. The lava beast attended by conspicuously not attending, one vent smoking at the doorway where the settlement draft still sat and signed under its stone. Bromir polished the same tap through the entire audience, 12 inches from the most important conversation in the floor's history, missing not a word. The herald's message ran through the counter panel in reported script, sentence by sentence, and it was a bill. Every evolution my shop sold drew its lift through the core. That was what evolution was, the herald observed, everything else being packaging. For years the draw had been vermin weight and beneath notice. My volume was no longer beneath notice. The core had felt a rhythm pulling on it from above, had begun reaching back for the beat, and the void quakes were its misses. The dungeon's oldest law applied. What draws on the heart owes the heart. The boss proposed a levy. 1 shard in every 5 my counter earned, remitted downward, and the core would stop improvising and start metering. The quakes would become schedule instead of weather. I read the terms twice and did what I am for. I negotiated the remittance to a weekly cycle through the counter itself. No couriers, no middlemen with pockets. I secured audit script in both directions, because a tax without receipts is a robbery with stationery. I argued the safety shield's upkeep out of the taxable base. The shield was already the dungeon's cut, and taxing a tax is surface guild behavior. The herald conceded the point with a half-degree of extra bow that I chose to read as professional respect. Then it named the boss's last condition, and the room got quiet in a new way. The shopkeeper's contract binds one man. A kingdom, the herald observed, cannot hang from one throat. The levy required a guarantor. A living name on the debt side, standing surety for the underkingdom's remittances, bound to answer if the counter ever went silent. I was still building the sentence that refused when Kaelith crossed the hall. She had held this door since before there was anything behind it worth a door. She set her sword on my counter. The whole hall heard the click of it, and gave the panel her name, and the panel took it the way it takes payments. Her reasoning, delivered flat to the room and mostly to me. She had been standing guarantee for this shop since the Western breach, unpaid and unregistered, and she preferred her risks in writing. If the kingdom's debts needed a spine to collect against, it already had one on staff. The paperwork was merely late. Shady registered, the king's guarantor. I amended the clause before the ink of it settled. First claim on the reserve, hazard wage in settled shards, and no collection against the guarantor while the shop stands. The debt comes through me and the building first, her last. The herald allowed every word. I signed knowing exactly what she had just priced her life at, and she watched me know it, and neither of us called it anything out loud. That is how things are said at my counter. Business concluded with a purchase, because even floor 100 does not leave a good shop empty-handed. The herald's escort beast, a blind pale hauler of the deep stare, was presented at the counter. One notable evolution, 3 shards, the first recorded transaction between the bottom of the world and the floor above it. I brewed it myself with the entire hall watching, which is the kind of pressure that ruins apprentices and steadies professionals. When the jump landed clean and the hauler stood up rebuilt, the room split again. The orcs thumped their hooks once in approval. The hive rang. The goblin eyes blinked into applause distance, and the lava beast's doorway vent produced one long plume of what I can only book as professional envy. Payment received, 3 evolution shards. Evolution shard reserve, 7. Faction chartered, the Underkingdom. Contract amendment, core tithe, 1 shard per 5 earned, remitted weekly. The herald had timed its visit. It noted on departure, so that the escort's fee predated the levy. Even floor 100 does not tip. The rest of the week was arithmetic under new law. 2 dons took their 8. The war speaker bought his second hook rank up a tier. The tunnel matriarch jumped her fastest runner. The hive replated 40 foragers at trough rate. The queen's road crew upgraded the switchback hauler's partner. 13 gross by remittance day. The counter opened a drawer I had never cut, counted 3 shards into it. 1 in 5, rounded in the core's favor, which I will be renegotiating for the rest of my life, and the drawer emptied downward with a sound of settling stone. Core tithe remitted, 3. Evolution shard reserve, 9. Core resonance, settling. The change came up through the taproots that same hour. The stumble did not vanish. It spaced out, steadied, stopped reaching early, a beginner with a metronome at last. 2 days without a tremor. Then 3. The kingdom had bought predictable ground, and the price was a fifth of everything, and I have paid worse for less. The herald departed the way it had come, and paused once on the way down, level with Kaelith at her post. It observed, in closing script, that the Underkingdom's guarantor stood watch in dead iron. Forged plate, cracked once, mended by hands. The core, it said, would weigh what she wore, and the core had just learned the difference between what grows and what merely holds. Then it stepped into the floor, and the pulse flexed once as the depth took its envoy home, and the flex went through the hall and through her. The old armor had survived a treant, a siege, a stasis winter, and a war. It did not survive being weighed. The breastplate split along the gold trim with a crack the whole hull heard, top to bottom, clean past the mended spine brace, and Kaelith stood in the wreck of it at full salute and did not move an inch. Bromir was rolling up his sleeves before the echo died. The hearth, he announced to no one in particular, was lit. Dead iron had carried her this far. The kingdom would grow the next suit itself.